Chapter 252. Regarding the behind-the-scenes manipulator of the Sword Tomb, before they met, Wang Lu had made countless speculations. There were some words that he didn't say during the conversation with Jiang Lu, but it didn't mean that he didn't have any ideas. For example, the true meaning of the 8 virtues test in Wang Lu's view was likely to be a bloody sacrificial ceremony. With a little sweetness, he lured the 4 sects to fight each other. When the blood flowed like a river, the casualties of the 4 sects' cultivators would become the best sacrificial offering. Even if the people of the 4 sects were relatively calm and rational and would not easily make a move, as long as they carefully designed the checkpoints, they could trigger the negative emotions in the hearts of the cultivators. For many demons, the inner demons of cultivators were also an excellent tonic. Similar cases were common in the thousands of years of history of 9 regions, and those who had the ability to design such a trap and profit from it were mostly great devils. However, because of this, it showed that the devil here was in a distressed state. Otherwise, he could directly come out and suppress this group of younger generation cultivators and put them into the blood furnace to refine them. Wouldn't that be more beneficial than anything else? After painstakingly designing the 8 checkpoints, in the face of Wang Lu's angrily flipping the chessboard, he only responded with 5 gates combined, which showed that his control over the situation was quite limited. This was also one of the reasons why Wang Lu dared to go deep into the exploration. However, even if his control was limited, a devil was still a devil. To be able to control the mechanism inside the ancient sword tomb, the devil's identity and magical ability were not simple. When Wang Lu approached, his complexion was indifferent, but his vigilance has been raised to the limit. Whether the opposite party suddenly brandished the sword to attack him, or the surrounding black tide roared, or the crossing adversity boat turned into a strange beast, he had enough preparation. However, he didn't expect that the opposite party would say such a sentence. "Are you sick?" Since this sentence was so nonsensical, in line with the principle of reciprocity, Wang Lu recalled the ancient saying that he learned in the past and replied, "If being handsome is also considered sick," that sword demon coldly snorted. "Then you're actually very strong." While silently looking at sword demon, Wang Lu touched his chin. "The aesthetic of the ancients is really strange." Sword demon said, "Regardless of the time, the face of a brainless person is always repulsive." Wang Lu was surprised. "Your scheme has been exposed by my supreme wisdom, and you still have the cheek to criticize me as a moron?" Sword demon said, "Crafty plots are just a small path. You are ingenious in your insignificant tricks, but you are stupid in the great Tao of immortal cultivation. If this isn't a moron, then what is? If you're not an idiot, how could you have such a peerless aptitude like the void spirit root, yet mess up your cultivation like this?" At the mention of this topic, Wang Lu suddenly felt like there was a fishbone stuck in his throat. The problem of the void spirit root being difficult to cultivate only existed after the age of chaos. For an old devil like the sword demon of the sword tomb, the void spirit root was still an extraordinary character like the Shi Huang immortal emperor and great ancestor Dishing. Thus, it was inevitable that he would feel a little disappointed when he saw Wang Lu. Of course, if he wanted to explain, there were many reasons. For example, the environment was not good, people's hearts were not what they used to be, and so on. Non-phase sword also had its own wonders. But in the end it seemed weak. After thinking about it, Wang Lu could only say, "I am willing." "You're willing? You're willing to do this kind of thing? If you're not a moron, then what are you?" Sword demon shook his head. "I thought I could find a talented person to help me get out of trouble. Unexpectedly, in the end I chose a trash like you. It's really a pity that time doesn't belong to me." With that, he turned around and continued his sword dance, completely ignoring Wang Lu on the boat. This change, even Wang Lu didn't expect it. After standing on the boat for a while, he found out that sword demon really didn't intend to pay attention to him, so he immediately frowned. Wang Lu didn't believe that sword demon was really not in a hurry. If he wasn't in a hurry, why would he bother to design the 8 virtues test? However, putting on this posture meant that sword demon was likely to see through his real situation. Not only sword demon was anxious, but Wang Lu was also anxious. Zhu Shiyao's life or death was unknown. The longer he delayed, the worse the situation would be. Moreover, for Wang Lu, this place was not suitable for him to stay for a long time. After all, this was not his home field. Relying on the spirit sword heavenly talisman alone was not enough. The more fatal problem was that the information held by the 2 sides was completely unequal. Therefore, if he wanted to break the deadlock, he had to resort to other means. After calculating for a while, Wang Lu decided to make a risky move to break the deadlock first. He brandished the sword of Mount Kuan and single-handedly rushed toward sword demon. Sword Demon didn't even turn his head back as he continued his sword dance. However, when Wang Lu approached him, the sword in his hand strangely appeared in front of his eyes. The tip of the sword was pointed straight at Wang Lu. Wang Lu was waiting for this kind of aggressive move. Nanfei's sword was good at defense but bad at offense. If Sword Demon didn't take the initiative to make a move, it would be difficult for him to continue. Once Sword Demon made his move, his sword of Mount Kuan immediately followed. When the two swords collided, Wang Lu suddenly felt a strange force coming from the sword. It was a slight but extremely sticky force. Not only it was difficult for him to use the nameless sword to rebound the damage, but it also almost made him lose his grip on the sword. Moreover, that force attached to the sword of Mount Kuan, like a poisonous snake, constantly slithering toward him, trying to invade his body. However, after that trace of force diverted Wang Lu's sword of Mount Kuan, it was difficult for it to penetrate further into Wang Lu's body. It was firmly repelled by the 206 sword bone's defense. After that sword strike, Sword Demon finally moved his eyebrows and then stopped his sword dance. A bit interesting. It's good that it's interesting. However, the next sentence changed the meaning. Such a stupid method, this is the first time this old man has seen it? Blindly strengthening the defense and even using the big heart demon oath to make yourself look like a turtle, it's simply stupid. A cultivator who cultivates to become an immortal cultivator should bravely cut through the thistles and thorns. You were born to be a target. What kind of immortal cultivator are you? How big of a grudge do you have against the person who taught you this method? How could he use such a vicious method against someone with void spirit root? Ridiculous, ridiculous. I thought I could get help from the 8 gates test, but unexpectedly, it turned out to be a joke. With that, Sword Demon no longer paid attention to Wang Lu and continued to practice his swordsmanship. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu's heart was shaken, and distracting thoughts began to emerge. This Sword Demon's words were like a sharp sword. Each sword strike was aimed at his vital points, making it difficult for him to remain indifferent. The hatred of void spirit root was one of his biggest regrets in his life. Although he had an unprecedented talent, he was bound within the framework of Nanfei's method. Although after 10 years of immortal cultivation he had become a top figure among the younger generation, but compared to the top figures who swept the world within 20 years? Although the environment of immortal cultivation in 9 regions could not be mentioned in the same breath before and after the Age of Chaos, anyone would inevitably think, why can't I have the achievements of my predecessors? Of course, whether it was Immortal Qin or Great Ancestor Dishing, it was all thanks to the immortal world that they could achieve success in immortal cultivation. Before the Age of Chaos, the surrounding spiritual energy was very rich, and the environment was very beautiful, but they still could not rely on their own strength to embark on the road of immortal cultivation. The environment that Wang Lu lived in was 100 times worse. Being able to have today's achievement was already commendable, even a miracle, but didn't the person before him live before the Age of Chaos? This place was a true immortal level sword tomb, and this sword demon old man was likely to be the remnant soul of the sword tomb's master. Perhaps his strength was not that strong, but it was very likely that he had mastered the immortal world's method. Otherwise, how could he ridicule just now? In other words, thinking to this, Wang Lu couldn't remain calm. It was true that Lingjian school had cultivated him all these years, and he never had any complaints about Nanfei's method. However, if he could have the immortal cultivation method of Great Ancestor Dishing, why would he still be obsessed with Nanfei's method? The only problem was that this sword demon didn't seem to have a good impression of him. Obtaining the immortal world's method from him would be as difficult as ascending to the sky. However, from another point of view, Sword Demon was trapped in the sword tomb. His situation was not as free and easy as it seemed. Otherwise, why would he need to tamper with the 8 virtues test and bring him here? At present he was just a bit angry. When he calmed down, it was not difficult to find that the only one who could help him was Wang Lu. If he thought that Wang Lu's skill was not good enough, then shouldn't he teach him the immortal world's method to help him get out of trouble? Therefore, as long as he put on a good attitude and seriously cooperated with him, perhaps this would be the biggest immortal opportunity in Wang Lu's life. As long as he thought about the record of Great Ancestor Dishing sweeping the world in 20 years, anyone would be fascinated by it. Thinking to this, the corner of Wang Lu's mouth couldn't help but curve up slightly. However, in just a moment, the smile on his face quickly turned cold. If he really thought about it like that, it would be tantamount to falling into the sword demon's trap. This sword demon was indeed worthy to be a devil from the ancient times. His ability to grasp people's heart had reached perfection. With just a few words he could shake people's mind, make them confused, at a loss, and unknowingly fall into a trap. Wang Lu admitted that the sword demon's words just now had really moved his heart. However, although he was moved, he didn't lose his basic reason. In the current situation, it was not his turn to ask for help. The immortal world's method was indeed a great temptation. However, first, sword demon might not really have it. At present, he might just be pretending. Second, even if he couldn't get the immortal world's method, so what? He, Wang Lu, was still the lead disciple of the Lingjian school, the top cultivator of the younger generation in 9 regions. Third, what was the purpose of his trip? Was it for the immortal world's method? His big sister Zhu Shiyao's situation was still unknown. Just because of a few words from a suspicious old devil, he was going to kneel and lick his boots? And the most important thing was, right now, who should be begging who? After calmly finding his own pace, Wang Lu was no longer disturbed by the sword demon's trick. After taking a deep breath, he directly reached into his mustard seed bag and pinched the spirit sword heavenly talisman. Since I'm such an eyesore, then I'll take my leave. With that, Wang Lu poured his magical power into the heavenly talisman, intending to activate it. His action was unexpectedly clean and swift, extremely decisive. Feeling the change in his magical power as well as Wang Lu's firm will, the sword demon finally couldn't maintain his composure and stopped his sword dance. Wait. Almost at the same time, Wang Lu closed the spirit sword heavenly talisman. The smile on his face was as if nothing had happened. What's the matter, Sir Sword Demon? Chapter 253. Wait a minute. When Wang Lu tried to launch the spirit sword heavenly talisman and immediately returned to the sect, Sword Demon finally could not maintain his calm and coldly said, "Wait a minute." Wang Lu inwardly sighed, "You finally can't hold it anymore? What can I do for you, Mr. Sword Demon?" Sword Demon Twilight glanced at the mustard seed bag in Wang Lu's hand. "The talisman in your bag is the emergency talisman given by the sect to send you back to the sect in a critical moment? If you rashly use it here, aren't you afraid that it will cause the space to shake and turn you into powder?" Wang Lu said, "Since it's a life-saving thing given by the sect to its disciple, it naturally has a life-saving method. In theory, no matter what kind of dangerous situation you are in, even if it's the devil world or the Western continent, nothing can block the transmission effect of the talisman." "It actually has such a miraculous effect?" Sword Demon was greatly surprised. Wang Lu explained, "After the age of chaos, although the strength of cultivators is not as good as before, many of the techniques have advanced a lot compared to 10,000 years ago. This is indeed an eye-opener. Can you let this old man have a look?" Wang Lu just smiled. Since the Grand Cloud Mountain was set up by the elders of the Imperial Beast School, no matter how stupid Wang Lu was, he should remember that there were some things that couldn't be casually seen by others. "Very well, since you're wary, then forget it. Since you have so much confidence in your talisman, then go ahead and try it. But I also want to remind you, don't underestimate the power of the sword tomb. If it's so easy to get out, why do you think I stayed here until now?" Wang Lu was silent for a moment and then smiled. "If the talisman can be used, I will remember to take you with me next time." Then Wang Lu really stimulated his magical power and lit up the spirit sword heavenly talisman in his mustard seed bag. The current situation was completely out of his control. Every conversation with Sword Demon made him feel like he was facing an abyss. Behind the seemingly dull dialogue, there was actually a surging undercurrent. Rescuing his big sister was important, but it was not worth it. Coming to this point was already benevolent. It was time to get out of here. The only question was, could he go? Boom. At the moment when the spirit sword heavenly talisman lit up, the vast sea of bitterness set off monstrous waves. The black fog ferociously tumbled and was repeatedly torn by the invisible giant force. The sea of bitterness boat in the black tide was instantly covered with cracks and was about to collapse. The specks of light where Sword Devil was also greatly compressed and rapidly shrank. At the same time, Wang Lu's heart sank. He knew that things were going to be bad. Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman was indeed marvelous, but its energy was, after all, limited. Breaking through the spatial barrier and constructing the teleportation channel consumed a lot of energy. Therefore, the Heavenly Talisman was made with great care and effort. Every bit of energy had to be put to good use. When it actually took effect, the user would just silently disappear on the spot, and there wouldn't be any unnecessary changes. If the energy was used to trigger the huge waves in the bitter sea, it meant that the teleportation had failed. Sure enough, after a while, the huge waves in the sea of bitterness gradually subsided. Wang Lu held a few remaining light spots of the Heavenly Talisman in his hand. He was still in front of Sword Demon, not on Spirit Sword Mountain. Wang Lu silently closed his eyes and sighed. At this time it was useless to say anything. Complain that the sex treasure was not powerful enough? Regret that he shouldn't rashly go in? Speculate on the principle of the heavenly talisman's failure? What's the use? When he made the decision, he should have fully considered all the changes. Therefore now was the time to start the plan. Although it was shocking that the heavenly talisman failed, it was not particularly unexpected. The worst expectation was even worse than this. Then, it was not that he couldn't play anymore. Just when Wang Lu was ready to regroup, Sword Demon finally opened his mouth. You underestimate this ancient sword tomb too much. Your spirit sword heavenly talisman is indeed unique, it can actually cause the bitter sea to boil. In my time, even the most brilliant talisman master couldn't draw such a talisman. However, no matter how brilliant it is, it's still a mortal's method. It won't work in the tomb of a true immortal. Speaking to this, Sword Demon paused and then said, if you want to escape from this restriction, unless you have the means of a true immortal, you have to obtain the master's approval. Master. Hearing this, Wang Lu finally realized a problem. The ancient sword tomb, as the name suggested, was a tomb of swords. However, it was not difficult to find out that what was buried here was not as simple as a sword. The master of this place is called Zhong Xingming. Hearing this, Wang Lu was startled. Zhong Xingming? What a familiar name. The Baili sword god that was specifically recorded in the Baili Ascension was not a true immortal, but was even more powerful than a true immortal? According to the rumor, the Baili sword god Zhong Xingming was a powerful sword cultivator 16,000 years ago who was unhindered in the 9 regions. The primal chaos heaven-splitting sword that he cultivated was invincible. He was an illustrious character in that era of powerful cultivators. Wang Lu clearly remembered the record in the Baili Ascension. Zhong Xingming had never tasted defeat in his life. However, he had never fought against the most famous and powerful cultivators in the present age. What really made him famous was the heaven-splitting tribulation. More than 20,000 years ago, there was a devil in the Baili region who tried to steal the heaven secret, which caused the wrath of the heaven and earth. The heaven-splitting tribulation continued, and the people of the Baili region were plunged into misery and suffering. The earth veins withered, and the Baili region was unable to recover its vitality for more than 1,000 years. Later, the heaven-splitting tribulation dissipated, but the Baili region was still particularly gloomy. The cultivation path of the cultivators in this place was far more bumpy than in other places. At every checkpoint, the heaven and earth would make things difficult for them. And after going through many difficulties to reach the Mahayana stage, the ascension tribulation that they faced was far more powerful than in other places. Ordinary cultivators had to go through 1 in 9 heavenly tribulations and 2 in 9 heavenly tribulations. However, in this place, the heavenly tribulation started from 3 in 9 heavenly tribulations. When Zhong Xingming turned Baili's feng shui line into his own, he used a matchless divine sword to attract the 4 in 9 heavenly tribulations. The sword chi broke through the night and dispersed the 10,000 years of haze in one fell swoop, opening the light for the later generations of cultivators. After experiencing nearly 10,000 years of suppression, Baili region soon glowed with extraordinary vitality. Later, in several thousand years, 3 supremes successively ascended from this place. In the 9 regions it was second only to the central region. However, after the heaven-splitting tribulation, Zhong Xingming himself was fatally injured and soon died. Later generations commented on this person, all of them felt deeply regretful. With the power he showed during the heaven-splitting tribulation, even if he was not a true immortal, he was still better than a true immortal. If he could successfully cross the tribulation, perhaps he would be a prominent figure in the immortal world. In the Baili Ascension, when Zhong Xingming fell, there was no sound. He lived a lonely life. When he was alive he was vigorous, and when he died it was normal. However, unexpectedly before he died he built such a tomb. This tomb was built before the final battle, and it was originally a place for him to bury his mantle and find a successor. However, after the heaven-splitting tribulation, Zhong Xingming was seriously injured by the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. His jade mansion collapsed, and his primordial spirit scattered. He felt that he had a slim chance of survival, so he came here alone to seek a slim chance of survival. He sealed himself in the deepest part of the tomb and connected it with the feng shui line. Then, his primordial spirit scattered into millions of remnant souls to drive away the heaven-splitting tribulation. Every wisp of remnant soul was connected to the feng shui line, absorbing the good fortune of heaven and earth. If the heavens favored him, perhaps he could recover to his original state. Perhaps he could succeed, perhaps he couldn't. Even if he succeeded, it would take a long time. At that time, Zhong Xingming was just making the last gamble of his life. However, Perhaps he was not fated to die, or perhaps his immeasurable merit for opening the immortal path for the tens of thousands of cultivators in Baili region was rewarded. In short, after more than 10,000 years, those millions of remnant souls were finally provoked to swallow each other and gradually restored to their original state. Speaking to this point, Sword Demon paused for a moment. He looked at Wang Lu with great interest and then said with a smile, however, even Zhong Xingming himself didn't expect that in this process, he would meet a group of uninvited guests, which led things out of control. Seeing Wang Lu's deep frown, Sword Demon's smile became even wider. This method of resurrection has a very fatal flaw. Those millions of remnant souls absorbed external force and condensed into one. During this process, it was inevitable that there would be impurities mixed in. These impurities are also related to Zhong Xingming's cultivation method. All his life he cultivated the sword and courageously advanced. Any evil spirit, whether inside or outside, was suppressed or beheaded, and could not approach him. However, after his death, all kinds of devils would come to his door. In order to avoid turning into an evil spirit when he was resurrected, Zhong Xingming made another arrangement before his death. He buried the yin-yang sword division array in this tomb, which divided the millions of remnant souls into good and evil, and then created a guardian to suppress the evil spirit. When the process of resurrection reached the final step, the good side could command the guardian to refine the evil spirit, extract its soul essence and combine it into one, thus resurrecting from the dead. During this period of time, although the arrangement was not perfect, and after the passage of 10,000 years, many of the mechanisms were rigid and decayed, but generally they were still functioning. Unfortunately, when it was about to be completed, an outsider came to this tomb and rashly broke the guardian that suppressed the evil spirit, releasing a devil that was supposed to be dead. Hearing this, Wang Lu suddenly remembered one thing. Previously, in the 8 trials, because of the strange cold voice, Wang Lu became suspicious and guessed that there was a manipulator behind the scenes in the sword tomb. However, after carefully thinking about it, the voice first appeared in the 2nd trial, where the guardian was attacking. In other words, truly he brought this upon himself. After taking a deep breath, Wang Lu laughed self-deprecatingly. This trip to the ancient sword tomb was really stupid. From the very beginning, the people of the 4 sects were played in the palm of the other party's hand. This sword demon only used a few words to make everyone go in the wrong direction. Whether they were the successor disciple of Xingjing sect, the lead disciple of Kunlun Immortal sect, or a super-professional adventurer, all of them were kept in the dark. Like a marionette, they were wantonly driven around. However, compared to being shocked by the truth, what was more important was to think about this question. What was the purpose of this sword demon to reveal the truth without any disguise? I want you to do me a favor and at the same time do yourself a favor. As I said just now, you and I are in the deepest area of the sword tomb, which is completely sealed. If you want to get out, you have to get the permission of the original owner. Although I am Zhong Xingming's remnant soul, at this time my state is not complete, so I can't be regarded as the original owner. Therefore, I don't have the authority to open the seal. If you want to get the authority, there is only one way. While speaking, Sword Demon waved his hand, and a crystal mirror appeared in front of him. In the mirror, the figure of an old man with white hair and beard was reflected. His appearance and clothes were no different from Sword Demon's. Only the character on the back of his robe changed from devil to god. Obviously, this was the other remnant soul of Zhong Xingming, the symbol of the positive sword god Zhong Xingming. And beside the sword god, Wang Lu saw a figure that he hadn't seen for a long time. Big Sister Zhu Shiyao. Chapter 254. When he saw his senior sister, Wang Lu was not surprised at all. It was better to say that under the premise that the leader's manual showed that his senior sister was not dead yet, this was the only place she could be. Where else could she be other than here? Apart from the deepest part of the sword tomb where only the sword god could freely enter and exit, where else could she appear? Seeing Wang Lu staring at Zhu Shiyao, Sword Demon also sighed with emotion. She's your senior sister? She's very different from trash like you. Even in my era she was a top genius. When I first saw her, the sword god and I were shocked and couldn't wait to pass on our mantle. Unfortunately, compared to the legitimate successor, I, Sword Demon, was suppressed by the guardian. Not to mention competing with him for the successor, I didn't even have the ability to move freely. At that time, the guardian was in a deep sleep and it was difficult to wake him up. The sword god was worried about how to kill me, but he immediately sent the best assistant to him. Speaking of this, Sword Demon added, I and the sword god are of the same origin, and under the effect of the yin and yang sword division formation in this tomb, We can't touch each other and must rely on external forces to hurt the opponent. Zhu Shiyao was won over by the sword god, and I didn't have any hope, but I didn't expect that not long after she came in, another group of people followed. At that time, the sword god was busy dealing with Zhu Shiyao and just happened to relax his vigilance, which gave me a chance. Sword Demon said, with my strength at that time, there wasn't much I could do. Even without the sword god's hindrance, in the case of the guardian not being eliminated, I could only say one sentence at most. Fortunately, that sentence worked in the end. In this regard, Wang Lu laughed twice, expressing the revolutionary optimism of a professional adventurer. I don't need to say anything more about what happened after that. I changed the settings at the 8 virtues test and absorbed your negative emotions to strengthen myself. If it wasn't for you, I would have been able to make those people kill each other, and the benefits I gained would be more than what I have now. Wang Lu chuckled twice to echo her words. Well, there's no need to talk about irrelevant things, let's get back to business. What I want you to do is very simple. As Sword Demon spoke, he extended his hand and pointed at Sword God. Kill him and let me inherit all of Zhong Xingming's power. I will be able to open this tomb for you. At that time, not to mention escaping, all of the relics in the tomb will belong to you. Because the swords in the sword catacomb were divided into yin and yang, the sword god and the sword demon could not touch each other, so they could only rely on external objects to kill each other. In Wang Lu's view, they were walking the path of followers, and the two sword gods and demons were playing the role of heroes. Sword God was one step ahead and snatched Zhu Shiyao, the trump card, so Sword Demon had to find another way. Now he pinned his hopes on Wang Lu, but why should I help you? Wouldn't it be better to join hands with Senior Sister to kill you and fulfill the Sword God's wish? Wang Lu spread his hands and threw out his question. This question was very sensitive, but he couldn't not ask it. Because if he didn't ask such an obvious question, it was basically telling others that he had already made up his mind and that there was no need to ask again. That was tantamount to shedding all pretense of cordiality. Sure enough, regarding Wang Lu's question, Sword Demon wasn't angry. On the contrary, since Wang Lu was willing to ask, it meant that there was room for dialogue. It's very simple because helping me is more beneficial. Sword God is indeed stronger than me, but he has already found his successor. Zhong Xingming's Sword Dao can only have one true disciple. Since Sword God has chosen Zhu Shiyao, it is impossible for him to choose you. Even if you help him kill me, you won't get any benefits. With your messy cultivation method, you will only be left further and further behind by your senior sister in the future. Her aptitude is almost the same as the void spirit root, and with the true immortal's inheritance, her future is even more limitless. If you want to maintain your dignity as the chief disciple, you can only choose my side. Moreover, it's precisely because I'm weaker than the sword god that I can promise you more benefits. For example, you always wanted to ask but hesitated to ask about the immortal level cultivation method that can adapt to the void spirit root. Thump thump. Wang Lu could clearly hear his own heartbeat. I know that in these 10,000 years, the external environment has changed greatly, and many cultivation methods have lost their effectiveness. However, the primal chaos heaven-splitting divine sword that I cultivate focuses on cultivating the primal chaos. It doesn't rely on external objects, doesn't respect the heaven and earth, and can even break the vault of heaven. It is not affected by the changes in the external world. Wang Lu was silent for a moment. Not affected is very good, but are you sure that the primal chaos heaven-splitting divine sword can subdue the void spirit root? Ah, subdue is a good word. Sword Demon laughed. Although your cultivation method is a mess, your understanding of immortal cultivation is not bad. What you said is right, cultivation methods and spiritual roots, it is precisely the relationship between one thing and the other. What is spiritual root? Only when the cultivation method is outstanding enough, it is the root, connecting the heaven and earth with man, supporting the cultivation of the giant tree that climbs to the heavens. If the cultivation method can't subdue it, it is like a roaming dragon, following one's heart's desire, unable to be driven by man. Your void spirit root is probably the most powerful spiritual root in 9 regions, so naturally, it needs the most powerful cultivation method to subdue it. However, the non-phase method that you cultivate now is difficult to take on. With that, Sword Demon said in a sinking voice, according to legend, the spiritual root void spirit root is something from the immortal world, and only the method of the immortal world can subdue it. And after I broke the heavenly tribulation, I indeed fell before I could ascend. However, I am confident that my primal chaos heaven-splitting divine sword is not inferior to the method of the immortal world. If you cultivate according to this method, coupled with your own perception to improve and innovate, relying on the advantage of the void spirit root, it is enough to recreate the awe-inspiring power of immortal Qin and great ancestor Dishing. Wang Lu let out a hain sound but didn't speak. This sword demon was indeed worthy to be a top figure in 9 regions. Whether it was cultivation base, wisdom or eloquence, they were all top-notch. His skill in inciting people's hearts could be said to have reached the point of perfection. Even Wang Lu himself found it difficult to maintain his calm. If it was other things, then it would have been fine. However, when it came to cultivation, Wang Lu couldn't help but care about it. However, it was precisely because he cared that he had to be extra careful. The other party's words were pleasant to hear, but how could he believe it? The one who spoke was a 10,000 years old devil, whose craftiness was needless to say. Moreover, from another point of view, Nanfei's method was by no means that simple. No matter how much prejudice he had against Wang Wu, the perception she showed on the path of immortal cultivation could be called brilliant. The fierceness of Nanfei's method was also recognized by the world. Seeing Wang Lu's hesitation, Sword Demon suddenly said with a smile, "Half of the merit of a method lies in the person. The creator of this Nanfei's method is undoubtedly a shocking talent. I believe that person also has a place in 9 regions. However, this set of method is not suitable for you. You cultivate Nanfei's method with twice the effort for half the result. Naturally, you can't subdue the void spirit root, and you can't even display 70 to 80% of your ability." Without waiting for Wang Lu to refute, Sword Demon threw out a heavier counterweight. "You don't like Nanfei's method, and you don't even have the enthusiasm for cultivation, so why bother to be so persistent?" Heh. Wang Lu still didn't speak. The opponent threw out such sensational remarks just to cause a dispute, to throw out the next point of view. This point alone was simply too weak to withstand a single blow. Don't like cultivation? Don't like Nanfei's method? If he didn't like it, was his 10 years of painstaking cultivation fake? Although he couldn't be compared to those ascetic cultivators who mistreated themselves, his 10 years of effort was not inferior to anyone. In the past 5 years, he and Lu Li had been seriously injured countless times in the Misty Peak martial arts arena. Could it be fake? Could it be that such investment didn't prove his enthusiasm for immortal cultivation? However, Sword Demon sneered and said, "If you really like cultivation, why don't you have your own opinion and just blindly follow the teachings of others? You have a very aggressive temperament, you make your own decisions and you like to be a teacher. You like to take a different path in everything, but why do you blindly follow others in immortal cultivation? You can say that it's because of your trust in your sect, but this is not contradictory to your constant self-improvement. The teachings of the predecessors are just the foundation, but the towering tower should be built by your own hands. Yes, you have indeed developed a lot of novel tactics within the framework of Nanfei's method, but these methods are only temporary solutions. In addition to pleasing the crowd, what else can they do? You blindly prefer the heterodox path, but you don't approach the main path. Can such an attitude be called as loving cultivation? Humph, in fact, deep in your heart you hate this set of methods, so you subconsciously avoid it. It's ridiculous that you boast that you're smart, but you're actually ignorant of your own self-deception. There was a long silence, during which Wang Lu was completely unable to open his mouth. As time went by, the cold sweat on his back turned cold. What a powerful sword demon, what a powerful sword god of Bai Li. This was an open and above-board plot. Sword Demon didn't need any crafty plots, nor did he worry that his intention would be seen through. Just based on what he said just now, it was enough to completely destroy the opponent's heart. When the logical ability of the two sides in the dialogue was above a certain level, what determined the strength of the dialogue between the two sides was not the ability to invert black and white. If there was a reason, then there was a reason. If there was no reason, then there was no reason. The side with the biggest reason was strong, that's all. And now, Sword Demon's reason was obviously bigger than Wang Lu's. Each of his words accurately fell on the key point, which the other side couldn't ignore. All these years, how could Wang Lu not reflect on himself? Didn't he want to sweep the world like great ancestor Dishim? Didn't he want to be invincible like Zhu Shiyao? It's not that he didn't want to, therefore, even if Wang Lu knew that Sword Demon's words couldn't be completely trusted, in fact, Wang Lu could instantly think of dozens of hypotheses about how Sword Demon had schemed to frame him if he let go of his imagination. But at this point, without any real evidence, Wang Lu was like a frightened rabbit, and his appearance was really too unsightly. Now that things had come to this, what he should do was to always maintain vigilance, and then take one step at a time. While Wang Lu was in silence, Sword Demon once again added, "Wait, if you don't believe me, I can teach you the introductory mnemonic formula. You can first analyze it and then make a decision. So, do you practice it or not?" Thousands of thoughts flashed through Wang Lu's mind. Finally, he clenched his teeth and said, "Practice it, why wouldn't I?" Chapter 255. Primal Chaos Heaven-Splitting Divine Sword, created by Sword God of Baili combining the ancient inheritance, was a peerless sword technique of its own. Although it was called a divine sword, it was actually a complete set of techniques, including cultivation, body forging, heart refining, spirit tempering. Even refining, drawing talismans, alchemy, and breeding were involved. Even if it was just the introductory formula that Sword Demon taught Wang Lu for experience, it showed a very high level, worthy of the title of true immortal in ancient times. Wang Lu spent half a day to analyze the initial formula passed by Sword Demon. Although it was only the introductory level, it was still amazing. Sword Demon himself was also amazed. Although he didn't like the technique that Wang Lu practiced, he had never heard of the method used to analyze the primal chaos heaven-splitting divine sword, which made him very surprised. After the age of chaos, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth changed, and the number of powerful people with magical powers decreased a lot, but the heterodox methods also ushered in great development. For example, man-made spirit root and so on were excellent examples. Since you have the perception and the method, it probably won't take long for you to master the essence. Well, although you wasted a lot of time in the past few years, after all, you are not a rotten wood. Seeing that Wang Lu understood very quickly, Sword Demon praised him, but then said, "Unfortunately, you probably don't have time to master the essence." Wang Lu raised his head. "What's wrong?" "They're coming." Of course they couldn't be others. In the black tide, a dazzling light shone. In the light, Zhu Shiyao's sword momentum was brilliant, like the scorching sun. It was the high-grade spirit treasure Great Sun Golden Brilliant Sword. The woman's sword divided the black tide, and her feet stepped on the waves, riding the wind and breaking the waves. Behind Zhu Shiyao, Sword God stood with his hands behind his back, chaotic magical power surging around his body, closely connected with Zhu Shiyao, strengthening the latter's various ancient magical powers. The two of them came aggressively, their killing intent boiling. More importantly, Zhu Shiyao, who was in the lead with the help of the Sword God, impressively showed an aura close to the Jindan stage. The long sword pointed downwards and Wang Lu, who was facing it, felt as if a mountain was collapsing in front of him. The torrential sword force was unparalleled. Wang Lu was shocked to see this. "This cheater has gone mad." Sword Demon said coldly, "Humph, although I can't fight Sword God head-on, I can support my agent." Zhu Shiyao had the full support of the Sword God, so it was not surprising that she had the aura of a king pill. "Don't worry, I'll do my best to help you." Wang Lu let out a hang sound and silently took out the sword of Mount Kuan. He took 2 steps forward, and as his footsteps staggered, his momentum also rose. Although he appeared to be on the verge of collapse under Zhu Shiyao's oppression, the space within the 3 feet sword defense was still under Wang Lu's control, just like a reef under a huge wave. At this time, a gray magical power spread out from behind Wang Lu. Although the total amount was not much, it contained an elusive mysterious magical ability. Wang Lu, who had preliminarily analyzed the sky-splitting sword technique, naturally recognized it. It was the lost technique that Sword God of Baili used to move unhindered in the 9 regions, the sky-splitting sword chi. The source of this sword chi came from the primal chaos, which had the power to split the heaven and earth, as well as the power to create good fortune. At this time, Sword Demon released the sky-splitting sword chi to strengthen Wang Lu's strength so that he could contend against Sword God and his disciple. "Open your Jade Mansion and accept my sword chi. Now that you and I are in the same boat, we can only help each other." "You and I are in the same boat?" "Well said." Wang Lu nodded his head and opened his Jade Mansion. At the same time, he once again took a step forward, only a few steps away from Zhu Shiyao's wave-splitting sword. The imposing manner of the 2 sides were like rays of light, neither giving way to the other. Under the pressure, the black fog boiled and dispersed to the side. The sword of Mount Kuan in Wang Lu's hand also slightly trembled. Under the atmosphere of this peak confrontation, it was unknown whether this ancient sword was excited or fearful. However, the next moment Wang Lu gently flicked his wrist, causing the sword of Mount Kuan to draw a tiny arc. This action seemed quite redundant before the fight, but it actually contained a sword language. Of course, it was not the common sword language, but the secret sword language that only cultivators of Spirit Sword sect knew. Wang Lu believed that with the ability of his big sister, she would certainly be able to catch it. "You and I join forces to slay Sword Demon." "That's right, slay Sword Demon. If I lose, we all lose? Who wants to lose? We all lose. Eldest senior sister and I are from the same master, okay." This was the power of Wang Lu. No matter what, he always had a calm mind. Previously, Sword Demon shocked Wang Lu with words and tempted him with sky-splitting sword, which indeed moved Wang Lu's heart. However, although his heart was moved, after calmly thinking about it, he could still make a rational judgment. This was not the martial arts arena on Spirit Sword Mountain. Compared to a mortal-level method, his life was the most important. Sword Demon's method sounded very good, but because of this, he forgot the identity of the other party as a devil, which was simply stupid. As for sky-splitting sword. Haha, since you taught me not to blindly follow the footsteps of the predecessors, then if I give up non-phase method and fall into the rut of sky-splitting sword, wouldn't that be slapping myself in the face? In any case, I've already heard the introductory chant, so I'll spend decades to slowly deduce the next part. Don't tell me that you, Zhong Xingming, can't create a sword that I, Wang Lu, can't create? Therefore you're not that useful. When it's time for you to die, please die. Wang Lu's decisiveness could not be said to be not fierce. However, after receiving the sword message, Zhu Shiyao's sword momentum didn't change and still pointed straight at Wang Lu. The latter was suddenly surprised. Senior sister, your acting is too realistic. Even if she didn't receive Wang Lu's sword message for Zhu Shiyao, the right choice should be to slay Sword Demon first, not Wang Lu first. After all, Wang Lu was just a follower while Sword Demon was the hero. However, the next moment Wang Lu finally realized that something was wrong. Zhu Shiyao's eyes were as clear as water and as cold as ice. There was no trace of falsehood in her eyes. That brilliant sword light was even more open and aboveboard, as if it wanted to pierce through and crush Wang Lu. Is she really aiming at me? Are you crazy? You don't even recognize your own family? Regardless of whether he understood or not, as a cultivator, Wang Lu reacted immediately. The sword of Mount Kuan immediately lit up with a sword light. It was the innate formless sword chi, but compared to the sword chi in the past, it was a bit sharper. Sword Demon uttered an "oi" sound, his eyes revealing a look of approval. He had just finished analyzing the introductory chant, yet he could immediately absorb its essence and integrate it into the ready-made cultivation method system and apply it. This kind of aptitude and perception was indeed worthy of being a void spirit root. Unfortunately, it was still not enough. The next moment, the two swords intersected. Wang Lu only felt an irresistible strange force surging along the sword of Mount Kuan, completely interrupting his own pace. His sword defense, which should have been perfect and impregnable, was suddenly penetrated. Attached to the sword, the innate formless sword chi with a bit of primal chaos heaven-splitting sword intent completely collapsed. And after bearing the supreme divine might of Zhu Shiyao's great sun golden brilliant sword, a crack suddenly appeared on the sword of Mount Kuan. The sword spirit Autumn Beam let out a mournful cry as she was seriously injured. However, Zhu Shiyao's sword momentum didn't stop. Her brilliant sword light didn't deviate in the slightest. After breaking the formless sword defense, it went straight to the center of Wang Lu's forehead. Her killing intent was so strong that it seemed to be absolutely irreconcilable. At this life and death juncture, Wang Lu didn't show any weakness. Even if his formless sword chi had completely collapsed and the sword of Mount Kuan could no longer be used, but he still had this well-tempered body. With an unimaginable speed, Wang Lu suddenly bent his left arm, put his two fingers together like a sword, and hit Zhu Shiyao's immortal sword diagonally. It was the formless sword finger. This was a real life-saving unique skill, abandoning the weapon and using the body as a shield. According to the rule that the smaller the size of the formless sword defense was, the stronger the defensive power was. At this time, the formless sword defense with his two fingers was truly impregnable. However, when the formless sword finger collided with the great sun golden brilliant sword, it was as if the snow melted. The two fingers silently burst into a cloud of blood mist. The well-tempered formless sword bone was unexpectedly vulnerable. On the other hand, Zhu Shiyao's sword attack was finally stopped. This was only the first round. Just now, Wang Lu used all his means, pouring out all the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi in his jade mansion along his formless sword finger, and using the 3-inch formless Vajra sword as the bone, he was finally able to barely block the other party's greeting sword attack. But what about next? What was he going to use to block Zhu Shiyao's second sword attack? However, then, something unexpected happened again. After Zhu Shiyao's sword attack, she no longer made her move. Her eyes showed a bit of blankness, and the great sun golden brilliant sword also drooped down. There was no longer any fighting intent. Let's go. Seeing that Zhu Shiyao's state was not right, Sword God immediately gave a warning. At the same time, he drove Zhu Shiyao to fly backward with his primal chaos sword chi. While she was still in a trance, he quickly took her away from the opponent. That golden sword light soon disappeared in the vast black tide. Phew, I'm saved. On the other side, Wang Lu put down his seriously injured left hand, shook his head and sighed. In a head-on confrontation, it was not unusual to lose to Zhu Shiryao, but just now, when the two swords collided, Wang Lu had a strange feeling. Strange, obviously the strength is not that strong, but the formless sword defense seems to be vulnerable. The sword attack is even more awkward, as if every change of the formless sword has been restrained in advance by the opponent. At this time, Wang Lu somewhat regretted that when he was on the mountain, he didn't pay more attention to this elusive big sister. After all, he had just suffered a little loss at that time, but he immediately went all over the mountain to inquire about the other party's news, which was too targeted and narrow-minded. However, the necessary intelligence work was still pushed forward a little. For example, Wang Lu remembered that his master once said that Big Sister had a pair of good eyes that were hard to find in the world. At the same time, on the other side of the vast sea of bitterness, Zhu Shiryao and Sword God, who finally stopped, were speechless. Sword God looked at Zhu Shiryao, who was still in a daze, and sighed, not knowing what to say. This child's aptitude and perception could be called unprecedented, but it's really strange. Zhu Shiryao put away the great sun golden brilliant sword and pressed her two slender jade-like hands, which were praised by many people as the most suitable to hold a sword, on her eyes and gently rubbed them. That primal chaos sword demon is obviously just a mass of devil chi, but why do I feel a bit familiar? After a while, Zhu Shiryao put down her hands and sighed. Really annoying. When I came here, my glasses were broken. Chapter 256. Zhu Shiryao has a pair of good eyes that are hard to find in the whole world. Now Wang Lu only remembered that his master once said this sentence full of emotion. Because at that time, it was just a casual conversation after a meal, so it didn't touch on the subject too deeply. His master didn't say much about how good her eyes were. However, now that he thought about it, why would he say more? After a simple analysis, the conclusion was not difficult to come out. She just had to think about who her master was, right? Wasn't the sect leader of Spirit Sword Sect, Feng Yin Taoist master, famous for being blind even when his eyes are open? It stood to reason that the sect leader's cultivation method should be top secret. However, Wang Lu had an excellent master. In his master's place, no matter what kind of secret information, as long as he used a bottle of spirit wine, it could be exchanged. Naturally, Feng Yin Taoist master's eyes were also included in this. It was said that Feng Yin Taoist master cultivated a kind of magical cultivation method. With a special method to temper his eyes, combined with the stellar diffraction technique, he could directly see through the fog of time and space and predict the future changes. At that time, when the two cultivators fought, as long as Feng Yin opened his eyes, he could see through all of his opponent's plans and all of his possible strategies. Of course, this cultivation method not only had extremely harsh requirements for the cultivator, but its side effect was also ridiculously strong. Even with Feng Yin Taoist master's profound cultivation base, it was still difficult for him to control this pair of eyes. Without the help of the Kunlun mirror, he would still be blind even when he opened his eyes. At that time, his master's evaluation of this cultivation method of the sect leader was the word amusing. Because this cultivation method seemed powerful, but in actual combat, it was not easy to use. In addition to the side effect, seeing through the opponent's strategy could not directly translate into victory, because even if you could see through it, you might not be able to grasp it. However, now it seemed that his master's words about Zhu Shiryao having a pair of rare good eyes was aimed at this problem. Feng Yin Taoist master used the stellar sword method to train his eyes, which was the acquired magical ability. First, this cultivation method was not perfect, so he needed to constantly innovate. Second, the acquired magical ability was, after all, against the heaven's will. Needless to say, the road was bumpy. However, what about the innate magical ability? Just like Lu Li's inconceivably clear brilliant sword heart, which had amazing power, yet had no side effect, IQ has nothing to do with innate magical ability. What would happen if Zhu Shiryao had innate skills? Perhaps this was the secret behind her invincible godly sword. To put it bluntly, it was actually very simple. Zhu Shiryao was born with a pair of divine eyes, which could see through all the changes of the cultivation method and find the weak link to press it with all her strength. Just now, when Wang Lu used the non-phase sword to block her great sun golden brilliant sword, his swordsmanship was smooth and free without any flaw, but this kind of leakless swordsmanship was based on the reaction time and place. The non-phase sword was a kind of hard and soft swordsmanship, which required an effective judgment at the moment of contact. Wang Lu was originally very good at making sudden changes, but if all his changes were seen by someone who could foresee it and counter it, his advantage would immediately become a disadvantage. Therefore, when the two swords collided, the smooth sword momentum was interrupted, and the impregnable non-phase sword defense was also instantly broken. However, although he understood the principle of Zhu Shiyao's godly swordsmanship, he was still helpless in the actual combat. Zhu Shiyao was not Lu Li. Although she was not known for her wisdom, her divine eyes that could see through all things was enough to make all kinds of tricks unable to be hidden. If Zhu Shiyao's divine eyes had not reached great success, perhaps there was still a way. After all, from Fengyin Taoist master, it was not difficult to see that the divine eyes had its limitations. However, Big Sister had such a powerful innate magical ability, yet a few years ago Lingjian school did not dare to let her go out of the mountain. It could be seen that behind the powerful, there must be hidden dangers. In recent years, Big Sister had shown off her ability. Obviously, she had reached great success and was already invincible in the world. If it was so easy to find her flaws, Lingjian school would not let her go out of the mountain. After all, Zhu Shiyao was not the type of person like Wang Lu who could be left to fend for himself. So what should he do? While Wang Lu was lost in thought, Sword Demon coldly said, "Are you thinking about how to defeat the opponent? Why do you need to think about such a simple problem? You're probably thinking about some tricks. You have peerless aptitude, but all day long, you spend your mind on unorthodox methods. No wonder you've accomplished nothing." Yes, I've accomplished nothing, so why don't you change your agent? That Lingjian school's big sister, Zhu Shiyao, has excellent aptitude, which is just right for you to wield your hoe to loosen the corner. If you succeed in poaching her, not only you can get a powerful thug, you can also add a green hat to your old enemy's head, killing two birds with one stone. Regarding Sword Demon's rebuke, Wang Lu did not take it seriously. The same words for the second time would only have 1/10 of the deterrent effect. What could deter him was the truth behind the words. And since the truth had been pointed out, the words were worthless. Just now, Wang Lu even had the intention to kill, so how could he care about Sword Demon's words? He had his own plans for the cultivation method, so it was useless to say more. What he really cared about was that just now, he tried to cooperate with Big Sister to kill Sword Demon. Originally, the plan was in place, but unexpectedly it was smashed by Big Sister's sword at the first step. What was wrong with Zhu Shiyao? Although the relationship between the two had never been harmonious, there was no enmity between them. If they really wanted to talk about enmity, Zhu Shiyao's extreme sword language forced Wang Lu to retreat, which was a good reason to become enemies. But Wang Lu was magnanimous and didn't care about it at all. In the end, it was Zhu Shiyao who made the first move. Although there had been several conflicts, Wang Lu didn't think that Big Sister was the kind of narrow-minded person who couldn't distinguish right from wrong. Under that merciless Great Sun Golden Brilliant Sword, there must be a reason for her to fight with her own family. But what could it be? However, the most important question at the moment was not why Big Sister made the first move, but to have the ability to protect herself in this treacherous situation. Last time, Zhu Shiyao's sword broke his defense, but she stopped the fight. Wang Lu didn't want to bet on whether she would have such good self-cultivation next time. The initiative couldn't fall into the hands of others at will. But thinking about it, the gap in strength was very tricky. Zhu Shiyao was too strong. His master even gave her the evaluation of being invincible. Just thinking about it gave him a headache. Humph, staying in the current framework, you can never be her opponent. While Wang Lu was hesitating, Sword Demon began his old talk again. Your thinking is still not open enough. Yes, your senior sister has a top innate magical ability and a suitable cultivation method to assist her. In the same realm, she can be said to be invincible. But from another point of view, what if your realm is higher than her? No matter how powerful her swordsmanship is, can she defeat a Yuanying stage cultivator in the Shudan stage? Wang Lu thought about it. If it was a relatively weak Yuanying stage cultivator such as Taoist Master Jifeng or those Beastmaster school elders who didn't have a pet, it was really hard to say. Sword Demon said, the Void Spirit Root has always been regarded as the #1 spirit root in the world, but it doesn't have a particularly powerful innate magical ability and has harsh requirements for cultivation methods. So, why is it the #1 in the world? With that, without waiting for Wang Lu to answer, Sword Demon gave the answer first. Because it's fast. Cultivators with the Void Spirit Root cultivate very fast, and they never have a bottleneck. Whether it was Immortal Qin or Great Ancestor Dishing, they didn't have a record of being invincible in the same realm, but they simply disdained to fight for the false reputation of being invincible in the same realm. If they couldn't beat someone in the same realm, they could cultivate for a few months and fight someone 3 or 4 realms higher than them. From the time Great Ancestor Dishing received the imparting method from the immortal world, he opened the path of cultivation, and finally broke through the sky and ascended in just a short period of 20 years, which was nearly 100 times faster than ordinary ascended cultivators. With such a terrifying speed, no one could be his opponent. When those cultivators of the same time as him were still haggling over who was stronger than who, the cultivator with the void spirit root could leave them in the blink of an eye. Sword Demon said with some regret, "Unfortunately, in the past 10,000 years, there have been many changes in the surrounding spiritual energy, and the power of 9 regions is not what it was 10,000 years ago. I'm afraid no one can recreate the glory of Great Ancestor Dishing. However, even if they can't compare to Great Ancestor Dishing as a cultivator with the void spirit root, they shouldn't be trapped by such a small obstacle. You have already studied the introductory cultivation method of the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword, so you know what to do next." Wang Lu of course knew what to do. It was nothing more than to continue to promote his primal chaos heaven-splitting sword. Previously he only taught the introductory cultivation method. Although it was mysterious and extraordinary, as if it opened a new door for Wang Lu, the content behind the door was still a fog. Wang Lu was confident that he could innovate on his own within the existing framework, but time was not on his side. If he wanted to achieve results in the shortest time possible, the best way was, of course, to be taught the follow-up cultivation method by Sword Demon himself. However, because of the preliminary analysis of the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword, Wang Lu had a doubt. The basic idea of the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword was diametrically opposed to non-phase method. The basic idea of non-phase method was extremely conservative. Its design idea was to build an indestructible barrier through non-phase sword bone and other related cultivation methods, which forcibly squeezed the surrounding spiritual energy into the body. However, the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword was the complete opposite. The idea of the cultivation method was extremely unrestrained and free. Even the 9 heavens were not in its eyes. The result of the conflict between the two ideas was that, if he really wanted to deeply cultivate the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword, he must first give up the cultivation results of non-phase method. In other words, he had to destroy his own cultivation method. Of course, it was not to the extent of returning to the state of nothingness overnight. In fact, according to Wang Lu's calculation, the compatibility between the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword and non-phase method was quite good. Just as he thought of this, Sword Demon said, "If you're worried about the efficiency of changing your cultivation method, you don't have to worry about it." With that, Sword Demon pointed his finger at the boundless black sea outside the light. "This is the sea of bitterness." Wang Lu was stunned. "You don't want me to use these things to cultivate, do you?" Sword Demon said, "Why not? This is the accumulation of Zhong Xingming's thousands of years of experience. If you use it properly, it will be an important help for your cultivation to advance by leaps and bounds." Seeing that Wang Lu was hesitant, Sword Demon said, "It's right to pay attention to the accumulation of basic skills, but you must not compare yourself with ordinary people. The characteristic of the void spirit root is that it's fast. As long as you can control the general direction, no matter how fast your cultivation speed is, you don't have to worry about not being able to bear it. And with your perception in cultivation, you won't become a person who knows how but doesn't know why. It must be known that among the immortal cultivators in the world, all of them had their own fortuitous encounter, which allowed their cultivation to rapidly advance, far beyond the normal level. Great Ancestor Dishing's talent was peerless, and he also had the immortal world's method. However, he was able to ascend in 20 years because of several fortuitous encounters. He achieved the prestige of being the first person to ascend in 9 regions by relying on the legacy of countless true immortals. Several times, when his cultivation base soared, his foundation was almost shaken. However, in the end he successfully reached the step of ascension. This was the void spirit root. By now, I'm afraid there aren't many unexplored true immortals' legacies in 9 regions. Everything that Zhong Xingming left behind is already very valuable for you. This black tide carries all kinds of negative emotions of Zhong Xingming for thousands of years, as well as his thousands of years of perception. For me and Sword God, these things are meaningless, but for you, a newcomer who has only cultivated for 10 years, it's a priceless treasure. You can try to absorb some of them, crush them into primal chaos with the method of cleaving heaven sword, and then turn them into your own." Wang Lu didn't speak. Instead, he silently stretched out his hand, went through the bright bundle and plucked a black mist. In an instant, the boundless sea of blood surged into his jade mansion and completely swallowed him. Chapter 257. Very good. You've already mastered 80 to 90% of the 9 Sun Heaven Burning Sword. Your sword spirit root really deserves its reputation. I've never seen anyone with a perception of the way of the sword. Even in my heyday, I'm not as good as you. On an isolated island amidst the boundless black tide, a faint golden light shrouded a conspicuous hemisphere. Inside the sphere, Sword God held a plain long sword and slowly danced it. Next to him, the big sister of Lingjian school, Zhu Shiyao, followed suit. Her movements were exactly the same as Sword God's, but the great sun golden brilliant sword in her hand bloomed with brilliance no less than that of the sun. When Sword Demon and Wang Lu stepped up their cultivation, the combination of Sword God and Zhu Shiyao was naturally not idle. In terms of strength, this group occupied an absolute advantage. Zhu Shiyao's combat power was firmly above Wang Lu's, and Sword God, who inherited Zhong Xingming's orthodox lineage, should have a magical ability higher than Sword Demon. However, Sword God did not relax in the slightest. He seized every moment to teach Zhu Shiyao what he had learned. And now, what he was learning was an immortal-level sword called the 9 Sun Heaven Burning Sword. Sword God of Baili was best at Primal Chaos Heaven Splitting Sword, which is a big move. Although it's powerful, it's not suitable for you. Moreover, the stellar sword technique that you practiced in Lingjian school is also an ancient immortal-level technique. Its power is not under that of Primal Chaos Heaven Splitting Sword, so there's no need to change it. However, in addition to the core technique, a brilliant sword cultivator must have many unique techniques in order to learn from others. You're born with sword spirit root and stellar divine eyes. Every time you learn a sword technique, the benefits you get are far better than others. Unfortunately, in the current 9 regions, there are only a few immortal-level methods left. I'm afraid that your Lingjian school's stellar sword method was obtained by chance, and there's no second one. Therefore, although your swordsmanship is exquisite, it's not extensive enough. Now, I will teach you several sets of immortal-level and quasi-immortal-level swordsmanship. If you can learn them and thoroughly understand them, even if your cultivation stage can't advance by leaps and bounds, your actual combat power will advance by leaps and bounds. Saying that, Sword God smiled. To a sword cultivator, the so-called realm is meaningless. With an immortal sword in hand, there are only 2 types of opponents. The first type can be defeated and the second type cannot be defeated. That is all. Zhu Shiyao felt the same way. Her path of cultivation was different from others from the very beginning. Among the true disciples of Lingjian school, except for the one who was deliberately kept a low profile due to special reasons, she was the first one to enter the mountain, and also the most legendary one. Before she could remember anything, she was taken back to the mountain by her master. It was not until she was 10 years old that she heard her master tell her story. That was 20 years ago. When Feng Yin Taoist master went out to wander, he happened to see an evil cult indiscriminately killing innocent people in a village to refine their demonic treasure. Their method was extremely vicious. They actually dismembered living people with demonic weapons and chopped them into minced meat. When Feng Yin arrived, thousands of families in the village had been brutally killed. Later, Feng Yin used his sword to eliminate the evil, killing more than 100 demon cultivators who were present at that time. 2 old demons who cultivated Blood Infant didn't even have the chance to escape under the sword of a Taoist master of deity stage. However, after eliminating all the demons, Feng Yin used his immortal method to dissolve the local blood prison of wronged souls. However, he unexpectedly found that there were still survivors in the village. Following the guidance of the living aura, he was surprised to find that a 4-year-old girl was still alive. Wrapped in the dust of several demonic weapons, she stood quietly. Feng Yin Taoist master was puzzled by this unexpected survivor. Not to mention why the demonic weapons that wreaked havoc in the village let her go. At that time, when he felt that there were no living creatures in the village, he used his Stardust Sword Chi to sweep the village, turning all the hundreds of demonic weapons that wreaked havoc in the village into ashes. However, the Stardust Sword Chi didn't distinguish between friend and foe, so how did she survive? However, when Feng Yin took a closer look, he was even more shocked and speechless. Unexpectedly, when the demons massacred the village, the girl got the good fortune of heaven and earth and activated the legendary sword spirit root. The great Tao of heaven and earth poured into her body to protect her from being hurt by the sword, which saved her life. Even though Feng Yin Taoist master was famous in 9 regions for his stellar diffraction technique, he couldn't calculate how many coincidences were needed to achieve such a miracle. This child, at the most critical moment, activated the sword spirit root that had never appeared in 9 regions for thousands of years. Some excellent spirit roots could only be activated by chance. The activation of the spirit root and the infusion of the great Tao actually lasted for a very short period of time. However, it was this short period of time that helped her to save her life and preserve her boundless future. It was as if there was really a hand manipulating the line of fate, weaving an incredible miracle. Later, Feng Yin Taoist master immediately brought the girl back to Spirit Sword Mountain and trained her with the highest standard. However, the training method was very different from the other cultivators in the mountain. He didn't let her cultivate the immortal cultivation method immediately. Instead, he used a secret method to consolidate her foundation and refine the innate panacea at any cost to stimulate her to open the innate magical ability, Stellar Eyes. After her foundation was stable, she officially began to cultivate the Stellar Sword method. During this period, she had no distractions and was isolated from the world. And Feng Yin Taoist master never talked to her about the issue of stage and so on. If Zhu Shiyao didn't occasionally communicate with her fellow sect members or teachers, she wouldn't even know what the stage division was. At that time when she asked about it, her master probably said this: "Pure sword cultivators are born for the sword, and the sword is a weapon of murder. Therefore, the path of sword cultivation is a path of fighting. On the battlefield, no one would care about the stage or method. There are only two kinds of people on the battlefield, one is the winner and the other is the loser." Therefore, she only needed to divide the opponents into two types, the ones that she could beat and the ones that she couldn't. And Zhu Shiyao's nearly 20 years of immortal cultivation had indeed set foot on a thorny road. Although she was not allowed to go down the mountain for experiential learning in the past few years, the immortal cultivation on the mountain was not simple. Her master often brought some powerful opponents for her to practice her sword, but every time she practiced she would be covered with cuts and bruises. Later, when an uncle master came up the mountain and happened to see her, he was surprised. When the two of them talked, Zhu Shiyao realized that the opponents that her master caught for her were all far above her. But so what? For a sword cultivator, there were only two types of opponents, the ones that she could beat and the ones that she couldn't. It wasn't about those with high or low cultivation levels. However, the path of immortal cultivation was not smooth sailing. The biggest difficulty was the innate magical ability that her master opened for her, Stellar Eyes. This supreme magical ability was also famous in history. It was one of the few innate magical abilities that could be activated later on. Only the owner of the sword spirit root, which was rarer than the common heavenly spirit root, could activate it. However, the time and method of activation were difficult to predict. The power of innate magical ability was infinite, but it was also difficult to control. And Stellar Eyes was impressively the most difficult magical ability to control in history. In the history books, the most famous cultivator who activated the Stellar Eyes was the sect leader of the ancient star sect. With a pair of stellar divine eyes, he swept through the 9 regions and never tasted defeat. Unfortunately, before he died, he claimed that he couldn't really subdue this magical ability in his whole life. Until he died, he was deeply troubled by the side effects. And that was the time when the surrounding spiritual energy was rich, and the cultivators were almost omnipotent. Before and after the sect leader of the star sect, there were also some people who activated the stellar divine eyes, but without exception they couldn't really subdue this magical ability. Their regret was mainly because the activation of the stellar divine eyes was completely uncontrollable. Many people had activated the stellar divine eyes when they were still mortals, but they had never been known by others. Later, when they were finally discovered by the cultivators, they were accepted into their sect and cultivated, but they had already missed the best time. There were also some who were discovered in time, but the cultivation method was wrong, so they couldn't suppress the side effects of the magical ability. The deeper their cultivation base was, the stronger the side effects were. And Zhu Shiyao was simply unique. When she opened the sword spirit root, Feng Yin Taoist master concluded that she was likely to activate the stellar eyes. Therefore, he simply used the innate panacea to artificially stimulate the magical ability. On the stellar peak of Spirit Sword Mountain, there was also the stellar sword method passed down by the ancient star sect, which recorded the valuable experience of many owners of the stellar divine eyes in the past 10,000 years. Based on this, Feng Yin developed a set of strategy, which was to perfect Zhu Shiyao's innate magical ability. To this end, Feng Yin Taoist master even did not hesitate to personally cultivate the stellar divine eyes with the acquired magical ability. Through his personal experience he perfected the training plan for Zhu Shiyao. And after this selfless sacrifice he really found a way. The regret of the predecessors was that the power of the stellar divine eyes and the side effects always complemented each other, so it was difficult to separate them, suppress the side effects and strengthen the power. The predecessors' attempts for 10,000 years were all unsuccessful. After careful consideration, Feng Yin decided to find another way. After the Age of Chaos, in terms of personal cultivation base, people today were not as good as the ancients. However, in many delicate fields, they have made breakthroughs. And the path that Feng Yin chose was built on this background. In short, it was to make a pair of exquisite glasses. The side effect of the stellar eyes was that, in addition to insight into the future, it would inevitably see countless possibilities in the future, which would cause the field of vision to be blurred. This kind of blurriness could not be eliminated by any perception ability. Under the effect of the stellar eyes, the five senses were affected at the same time. Whether it was seeing or hearing, it was a group of double images, and it was very difficult to find useful information from them. No matter how hard the predecessors tried, they could not suppress this powerful side effect. However, in the hands of Feng Yin, it was magically alleviated through a pair of Kunlun mirror. The Kunlun mirror was an ancient immortal treasure, and also had the ability to see into the future. Therefore, after Feng Yin modified the Kunlun mirror, he wore it in front of his eyes. Through the polarization method that was invented after the Age of Chaos, a large number of useless virtual images were eliminated in one fell swoop, and he achieved a brilliant breakthrough that had not been achieved in 10,000 years. If it were not for the consideration of protecting his disciples, this method was not made public. With this innovation alone, Feng Yin Taoist master would have won an important seat in the academic committee of the Wanxian League. Of course, with Zhu Shiyao's cultivation base, it was unknown when she wanted to sacrifice and refine an immortal treasure like the Kunlun mirror. However, she had innate magical power, and the path she took was different from that of Feng Yin. She began to wear different glasses from a very young age. These glasses were all made by her master, Feng Yin Taoist master, and they were all imitations of the Kunlun mirror. The grade was not high, and it matched Zhu Shiyao's cultivation base at that time. With the help of these glasses, Zhu Shiyao was finally able to smoothly control the stellar divine eyes, and she also had the prestige of the invincible divine sword. However, behind the invincibility, there was still a small regret. That was Zhu Shiyao's dependence on external objects. When she had the glasses, her divine sword was invincible, but if she didn't have the glasses, she still remembered when she was 10 years old, she wore the glasses for the first time. Her master had caught an extraordinary white ape for her as an opponent. That white ape had monstrous strength, and its body was like the wind. According to a rigid standard, a white ape could easily defeat dozens of Zhu Shiyao, who had just completed the body-tempering realm. However, Feng Yin seemed to have full confidence in Zhu Shiyao. He put the white ape and Zhu Shiyao together on the mountain, and then confidently went down the mountain to wander. But the result of the actual combat was also shocking. On the first day, the white ape was caught by Feng Yin on the stellar peak. It was still in a state of shock. Although there was only it and Zhu Shiyao who looked harmless on the mountain, it did not dare to act rashly. When night fell, it smelled the fragrance of food in the bamboo room. It could not restrain itself and broke the door. As a result, the girl held a bamboo stick and beat the white ape until it pissed its pants. The white ape was very strong and it could not even use a bit of its strength. On the second day, the white ape came prepared. It was also holding a bamboo stick, and its stick skills were very exquisite. The girl was calm and fearless, and still used a green bamboo stick to meet the enemy. At that time, she had not even formally practiced swordsmanship, but the white ape's stick skills were broken, and his flesh was torn. On the third day, the white ape held two bamboo sticks, one long and one short, and attacked fiercely. The girl dealt with it more easily and easily. The white ape was stabbed in the abdomen by the stick, and it almost shit itself. On the fourth day, the white ape rode a deer and turned into a white deer ape rider. The girl's bamboo stick lightly tapped, and that night's dinner was braised venison. On the fifth day, the white ape could not bear the humiliation, and stole the girl's glasses under the cover of the night. 3 months later, Zhu Shiyao slowly got up from the hospital bed. At this time, she had already cured the fractures in her legs, and reconnected the broken wrist bones. The scars on her face had disappeared, and the blindfold on her right eye had been removed. At the same time, a lesson that she would remember for the rest of her life was forever left in the depths of her heart. Chapter 258. Many people had a misunderstanding about sword cultivators. They thought that sword cultivators used the sword to enter the Tao, which was tantamount to relying on external objects to achieve the Tao. In fact, for a real sword cultivator, a sword was not a simple tool or an extension of a limb. When one reached the realm of the unity of man and sword, the sword in their hand was by no means an external object, so naturally, it was impossible to enter the Tao by relying on external objects. In fact, among the many cultivators in the world, sword cultivators were probably the group that did not rely on external objects the most. As long as the sword was in their hand, it did not matter even if they did not have a magical weapon on their body. Similarly, for Zhu Shiyao, excessive dependence on external objects was also intolerable. With or without glasses, her strength was as different as the clouds and mud. If someone deliberately targeted this point in the future, wouldn't she just end up dead? Fortunately, Feng Yin Daoist master had already made arrangements. As Zhu Shiyao's cultivation base continued to improve, the glasses also changed. Although the performance was getting stronger and stronger, the size was getting smaller and smaller, and it was also getting more and more concealed. After Zhu Shiyao cultivated the sword embryo and reached Shudan, she simply wore contact lenses. From the appearance alone, no one would be able to guess that she had such a hidden danger. Moreover, the glasses could be taken back at any time when not in use to avoid any risk. According to Feng Yin's inference, if she reached the realm of King Pill, the Tao would be condensed into the King Pill in her jade mansion. Zhu Shiyao could completely rely on this opportunity to integrate external objects into the King Pill. At that time, the glasses that filtered the virtual image would become her magical ability, no longer an external object. No one could destroy or plunder it, and the only hidden danger would be completely eliminated. Unfortunately, Zhu Shiyao was not the King Pill, and her glasses were still her important flaw. When she entered the depths of the ancient sword tomb, her glasses coincidentally broke, causing her vision to suddenly become hazy. However, at this time, Zhu Shiyao was not the young girl who met the white ape for the first time more than 10 years ago. Even if her glasses were broken, her strength was still beyond the reach of others. As for the reason, it was very simple. Zhu Shiyao had stellar divine eyes for more than 10 years. In these 10 years, except for a few times when it was necessary, most of the time, Zhu Shiyao did not wear glasses. In ancient times, the sect leader of the stellar sect did not have an immortal treasure that could resolve the hidden danger. He completely relied on his own ability to resist the side effects of the innate magical ability. Although the hidden danger could not be eliminated, he could still sweep the 9 regions. The principle was the same. Moreover, although Zhu Shiyao's biggest killer move was the stellar divine eyes, it didn't mean that she was useless without the stellar divine eyes. She was born with sword spirit root, cultivated the highly compatible immortal level stellar sword method, and in her hand was the high-rank spiritual treasure Great Sun Golden Brilliant Sword. In terms of hard attribute, even Lu Li might not be stronger than her. If it weren't for the fact that the sword spirit of the Great Sun Golden Brilliant Sword was in a deep sleep, her strength would have been even higher if she cooperated with the sword spirit. Compared to the nearly invincible Zhu Shiyao, her opponent seemed to be nothing to worry about. After you've digested the 9 Sun Heaven Burning Sword, we'll go again. This time we must eliminate the opponents and not give them a chance to breathe. Although the sword demon didn't inherit the orthodox lineage, he came from the same source as me. Moreover, his methods are unrestrained, so it's very likely that he has some crooked martial arts. A long night is fraught with trouble. Zhu Shiyao had no objection to this. According to the sword god, if she wanted to get out of the ancient sword tomb, the only way was to eliminate the opponent who was covered in devil chi. And in the battle just now, the amazing devil chi was even clearly discernible in her hazy vision. It was completely in line with the standard of slaying demons and devils that her master often told her. But for some reason, just as she was about to deal a fatal blow, her instincts alerted her, and she had no choice but to stop. Without the help of the glasses, Zhu Shiyao mostly relied on her instincts to fight. She had been working with the stellar divine eyes for 10 years, and this body had been deeply imprinted. Even if she only relied on her hazy intuition, she would still be successful. But this time, her intuition told her not to make a move. What? There was no reason at all. Zhu Shiyao carefully checked herself several times using the method taught by her master to confirm that there was no problem with her cultivation method. At the same time, with the sword god watching over her, she wouldn't be troubled by any vicious spells. Why exactly? Zhu Shiyao never found the answer to this question, but she didn't need it anymore. She was a sword cultivator, not a scholar. If she encountered a problem, she would cut it with her sword. With the sword in her hand, she would press forward. I'm done. After Zhu Shiyao confirmed her state for the last time, she opened her mouth and said. Seeing that Zhu Shiyao had mastered the 9 Young Heaven Burning Sword in just a few hours, her whole body seemed to be immersed in raging flames, and her momentum also rose to the peak. The sword god nodded in satisfaction. Okay, let's go again, don't be lenient. At the other end of the bitter sea, the sword demon let out a sigh. It's really just right. It's indeed just right. If it was a few hours earlier, I would have to trouble you to fight alone. This is the time difference. Last time they returned without success. No matter what the reason is, to be cautious, their most likely choice is to spend a period of time to strengthen their strength. Zhu Shiyao's sword spirit root is blessed by heaven, and is most suitable to learn the various sword techniques that Zhong Xingming knew when he was alive. Every time she learns a set, her strength will obviously increase by one level, and the next battle will be a bit more certain. Unfortunately, he probably doesn't know that your void spirit root will benefit even more here. As he spoke, the sword demon's gaze swept around, and his heart slightly trembled. He saw that the originally boundless sea of black fog within a radius of dozens of miles had astonishingly disappeared, and there were already signs of drying up. Needless to say, this was of course Wang Lu's masterpiece. Although the plan to use the black tide to boost cultivation was proposed by the sword demon, he himself didn't expect that the void spirit root would be so powerful. In just a few hours, it had absorbed such a huge amount of black fog, and even refined all of it, turning it into his own magical power. Even if it was an enlightened king pill from the antiquity time, he would probably go crazy after being attacked by such a huge amount of black fog. However, Wang Lu easily absorbed, suppressed and refined all of the black fog, and didn't see the slightest side effect. His potential was simply bottomless. It's a pity that this place is sealed by an immortal level spell, and can't communicate with the great Tao of heaven and earth. Otherwise, you can completely rely on this sea of black fog to directly break through the King Pill realm. However, Wang Lu shrugged indifferently. What does it matter if the King Pill is not the King Pill or not? In terms of the density of my magic power, I'm already 10 times stronger than before. Even an ordinary enlightened King Pill can't compare to me at this time. Although I still lack some of the magical powers of the King Pill realm, I've just absorbed and digested the black fog, and I've also cultivated my own magical power. Entering and exiting just happened to draw an equal sign. Well, I now consider myself as the King Pill. Please call me enlightened Wang Lu. Even if you have the strength of the King Pill realm, you still can't be careless. Wang Lu smiled. Don't worry, I've already experienced senior sister's power too many times. As he said this, his smile gradually disappeared. So this time, as you said, I'll use absolute strength to crush her. Sword Demon coldly smiled. Interesting, you finally have the appearance. Very well, let me see the power of your newly cultivated magical power. As soon as his voice fell, a golden light shone in the distant sea of black fog. It was still Zhu Shiyao, still using the great sun golden brilliant sword to open the way. Wherever the sword light pointed, the black fog retreated. The woman, wrapped in the black fog, hurried all the way. Compared to riding the boat, she was actually a bit faster. Iske, you're indeed worthy to be the big sister of Spirit Sword Sect. Wherever you go, you're always so glorious. This time, Wang Lu stood with his hands behind his back, talking and laughing calmly, as if he really had the confidence to win. Behind him, Sword Demon couldn't be as sure of victory as Wang Lu. Just now, he saw the whole process of Wang Lu refining the black fog into a magical power. Because of the limited time, Wang Lu didn't have the time to immediately change his method, put down his non-phase method, and even lifted his big heart demon oath. Instead, he combined the idea of the heaven-splitting sword and made a great improvement on the original basis. To use a simple analogy, it was equivalent to building a primal chaos heaven-splitting sword courtyard on the foundation of non-phase method. It looked a bit nondescript, but the effect seemed to be surprisingly good. It was just that, before it was tested in actual combat, everything was empty. Wang Lu was formidable, but Zhu Shiyao was also not simple. Otherwise, why would Sword God choose Zhu Shiyao as his partner? A moment later, the combination of Zhu Shiyao and Sword God once again came in front of Wang Lu. And this time, Wang Lu didn't passively take the attack. When the other side was within 300 meters of him, he took the initiative to make his move. As he stretched out his right hand, Zhu Shiyao and Sword God, who had just entered the 300 meters range, suddenly felt the surrounding space surging. Is this an array that was arranged in advance? Silent and without any trace, they do have some skill. Sword God's brows slightly wrinkled. When they took the initiative to attack, of course, they were prepared for the opponent to wait for them to exhaust themselves. The opponent's strength was weaker than their own, so they certainly had to find a balance through array and other arrangements. Therefore, Sword God had long considered the possibility of a battle in advance. It was just that he didn't expect the opponent's array to be so hidden that it was completely undetectable. However, the next moment, Sword God was startled. No, this is not an array, this is its original magical ability? Shudan Stage's original magical ability? Without much time to think, Sword God wanted to use his heaven-splitting sword chi to affect Zhu Shiryao, making her temporarily avoid the sharp edge. However, unexpectedly after feeling the change in the space, Zhu Shiryao's willowy eyebrows slightly moved, and instead she rushed forward even more aggressively. At the same time, the original world of light and darkness collapsed and was replaced by a bloody desolate hill. On the dry land, there were countless broken weapons. Without exception, all of them were swords, like a desolate graveyard. This world was extremely narrow, and the space was only 300 meters in radius. However, at the edge of the world, there was a cage made of countless huge broken swords, which seemed indestructible. And Wang Lu, in the center of the world, spread out his palms and slightly bowed to the two uninvited guests. Welcome to my world. Chapter 259. As the surrounding space suddenly changed, Sword God immediately realized that the opponent had stimulated her original magical ability. The so-called magical ability was, in fact, a relatively high-level ability, while the original magical ability was a cultivator's great magical power that was engraved in the Jade Mansion, which was inseparable from the cultivator's own existence. It was just like a person transplanting an extra hand or an eye for themselves. The original magical ability was ever-changing, and there were too many possibilities. Generally speaking, only cultivators in the King Pill stage or above could engrave a magical ability in the Jade Mansion. It was really unbelievable that Wang Lu, who was in the Shudan stage, stimulated her original magical ability. However, only this original magical ability could silently change the world, which was beyond Sword God's expectation. It was an out-and-out original magical ability. Moreover, among all kinds of magical abilities, it was the most bizarre and ever-changing space type. As the surrounding scene suddenly changed, Sword God immediately made a judgment. The opponent did not achieve the King Pill stage, so this original magical ability should not involve the application of the Great Tao. However, in this strange man-made space, there must be something that was advantageous to the opponent and disadvantageous to the opponent. If he was cautious, it was best not to be wrapped in this original magical ability. Even if he was accidentally wrapped in it, he should immediately break the barrier and withdraw from the range of the original magical ability. With Zhu Shiryao's ability, it was hard to imagine that there was something that could trap her. After withdrawing, she could either release her sword chi to attack from hundreds of meters away, or simply wait until the effect of the original magical ability disappeared. However, she did not choose to do so. Instead, she adopted the most direct and bold way to deal with it. Rush to the face. No matter how many tricks the opponent played, it didn't matter. She was a sword cultivator, and with a sword in her hand, she was an indomitable sword cultivator. In this regard, Wang Lu had long expected it. Welcome to my world. As Wang Lu's voice fell, the world within hundreds of meters suddenly changed dramatically. Tens of thousands of swords broke out of the ground, and with their own broken bodies, they went straight to meet the opponent. For a time, the swords were like rain, firmly blocking Zhu Shiryao's momentum. Because it was already expected, the timing of this round of swords rain was too good. Zhu Shiryao's sprint was fast enough, but she was still surrounded by these flying swords that suddenly appeared. There were many flying swords and each of them contained a very strong power. They were not scattered because of the number. On the contrary, because of the large number, it was impossible to avoid. The swords flickered and the murderous intention was dense. Good. Sword Devil, who was standing behind Wang Lu, praised inwardly. Since the beginning of his cultivation, Wang Lu, this kid, has been walking on the defensive path of his non-phase method. Moreover, after he made the Big Heart Demon Oath 5 years ago, he never took the initiative to launch any attack. He hadn't attacked for 5 years, but he didn't expect to show off his abilities the moment he made his move. The huge amount of mana he had gained from devouring the black fog was unleashed to the fullest. This rain of flying swords had a kind of crushing momentum, using absolute power to suppress his opponent. Compared to those berserk sword cultivators who went all out, he wasn't the slightest bit inferior. This kid was indeed a natural attacker. However, on the other hand, he was also a natural-born trickster. At this moment, his Great Heart Demon Oath still existed. Logically speaking, he could not take the initiative to injure others with his immortal Tao cultivation method, but he used this natural divine ability to find a flaw. Natural divine ability, natural divine ability. At this time, this 300-meter space was like Wang Lu's body, while Zhu Shiryao and Sword God were the foreign objects that broke into his body. Since it was inside his body, many things had exceptions. Wang Lu took the initiative to launch an attack on them, just like antibodies that fiercely repelled the invading toxin. It was perfectly justified and natural. The source of inspiration for this move was the battle on the Grand Cloud Mountain, when his master used her 300-meter sword defense to bully and humiliate the Beast Master School's law enforcement elder. At that time, Wang Lu thought, since non-phase sword could cause damage by means of defensive counterattack, what if the range of counterattack was expanded infinitely? Of course, the amount of magical power needed to expand the sword defense would increase exponentially. Even his master himself couldn't do it, but at least it could open up a new line of thought. Then, when he decided to use Splitting the Heaven Sword to practice his natural divine ability, the original inspiration came to his mind and then quickly blossomed and bore fruit. Surrounded by tens of thousands of flying swords, Zhu Shiyao seemed to face a great dilemma. These flying swords were powerful and heavy, and their number was endless. If she was entangled by these flying swords, perhaps even a Taoist master with endless magical power known as the King Pill in Jade Mansion would fall. After all, fighting in someone else's natural divine ability was a battle of attrition. Not to mention that in just dozens of hours, the opponent's power seemed to have increased by 10 times, far above her own. It was just that the doubt in Zhu Shiyao's heart was only at the stage of simple curiosity. Because this sky full of swords was nothing in her eyes. The woman flipped the sword in her hand, and the light of the great sun golden brilliant sword suddenly changed, from a scorching sun to tens of thousands of stars. Although it was fragmented, the light was more blazing than before, like a river of stars, dazzling. That was her unique skill as the big sister of the Spirit Sword Mountain Stellar Sword Chi. The Sword Chi was as numerous as the stars in the sky. Although it seemed tiny, each of the Sword Chi was like an everlasting galaxy, with fierce and eternal inner strength. This was the powerful one against many killing move of the Stellar Sword method. However, no matter how powerful this move was, it was not omnipotent. Although the quality of the Stellar Sword Chi was high, the broken swords in the opponent's innate ability were not ordinary either. They were highly condensed heaven-splitting Sword Chi that had been transformed by the innate ability. The two offset each other, so it was already good enough to have a 1-to-2 exchange ratio. However, in Wang Lu's world, the total power of the sword rain was perhaps 5 to 6 times more than the Stellar Sword Chi. The Stardust Sword Chi and the broken sword collided, and in an instant, thousands of explosions rang out. The collision of energy and destruction rose and fell one after another. In the midst of the chaos, a dazzling golden figure broke through the encirclement of the rain of swords and rushed out. My goodness! Sword Demon, who witnessed the whole process, was even more surprised. Zhu Shiyao's Stellar Sword Chi, in a situation where her power was only 5 to 6 times that of her opponent, was actually able to open a bloody path. And the difficulty of this was actually several times more than it seemed on the surface. Because her opponent was not an ordinary person, but Wang Lu who had obtained the essence of his heaven-splitting sword Chi. In this case, ignoring the 5 to 6 times difference in power, she was able to open a bloody path, which meant that her use of the thousands of Stellar Sword Chi just now was ingenious to the extreme. It even meant that even if Zhong Xingming, the sword god of Bai Li, was in her shoes, he would not be able to do better. The Stellar Divine Eyes was indeed one of the strongest magical abilities. Unfortunately, before he could think too much, the sword light of Zhu Shiyao's great sun golden brilliant sword had already pierced in front of him. Wang Lu did not hesitate to grab the hilt of a sword that slowly emerged from the void, and then he pulled out the sword and swept it. A giant shadow that blotted out the sky swept from the side. Wang Lu wielded his long sword, and the sword body rapidly expanded as it swept across. It was as huge as a small mountain, and the huge sword body blocked all of Zhu Shiyao's escape routes. Zhu Shiyao, who was close at hand, was finally taken aback. The power displayed by Wang Lu's sweeping sword was surprisingly twice as strong as that of the thousands of sword rain. The core of this huge sword was the spiritual treasure, the sword of Mount Kuan. The rest of the sword was completely condensed from the highly condensed heaven-splitting sword Chi. This sword strike was fast and sudden, not leaving a single flaw for the opponent. To break this sword strike, the only way was to face it head-on. But in a head-on confrontation, how could Zhu Shiyao compete with this huge sword that was almost 10 times her own? Humph! With a cold snort from the woman, the answer was revealed. When Wang Lu's huge sword collided with the great sun golden brilliant sword, there was a seemingly negligible but extremely long stalemate, and then, the huge sword, like a dreamy bubble, suddenly shattered. Zhu Shiyao's sword momentum did not change, and there was no longer anything in front of her. The great sun golden brilliant sword directly pierced into Wang Lu's chest, almost all the way to the hilt. This Behind her, Sword Demon looked incredulously at Wang Lu, who was pierced by the long sword. She still couldn't block it? 10 times the strength plus above the standard skill, this was no longer a gap that could be made up by human strength. Why was she still? In the era when Zhong Xingming swept the 9 regions, there was no stellar divine eyes. For this supreme magical power, he had only heard of it for a long time, but unexpectedly, it was even sharper than the legend. Because this is not a human strength? In the heart of Sword Demon, Wang Lu's cold voice sounded. Only he was not surprised at all about what just happened. After several fights with Zhu Shiyao, he had really figured out the context of his senior sister's magical power. In fact, a long time ago there was a problem that troubled him a lot. It was rumored that the stellar divine eyes could see through the future, but too many futures overlapped in front of him, making it difficult to distinguish. Later, after the miraculous transformation of the sect leader, most of the virtual shadows were finally filtered out, leaving only one image. Then the question was, if the overlapping virtual shadows symbolized the countless possibilities of the future, then which one was left after being filtered out? Was there a need to ask? Of course, it was the victorious kind. It sounded simple, but from another perspective, it meant that Zhu Shiyao could clearly see the path to victory in battle. As long as she strictly followed what she saw, she would be able to walk towards victory as predicted. Even if this victorious future was hidden in the shroud of thousands of failures, in other words, it was like a lottery. Only 1 out of 10,000 tickets would win, but Zhu Shiyao would be able to draw out the winning ticket every time. In battle, the enemy's strength was 10 times hers, and her victory could only be built on a 1 in 10,000th miracle. However, the stellar divine eyes allowed her to win miracles every time. Such a magical power was naturally not something a human could match. When Zhu Shiyao held the sword in her hand, it was equivalent to holding Excalibur. However, Wang Lu did not panic. On the contrary, he heaved a sigh of relief. What? It was very simple. It was because Zhu Shiyao's sword had penetrated his chest. It was not his forehead. Being penetrated by the great sun golden brilliant sword, Wang Lu did not die on the spot. Of course, this was not because Zhu Shiyao was lenient, but because she was unable to do so. Even with the help of the stellar divine eyes, she could grasp even if there was only a 1 in 10,000th chance of winning. But what if the difference in strength between her and the enemy made her not have even a 1 in 10,000th chance of winning? Piercing the chest was the best result that Zhu Shiyao could fight for. Although the previous sword rain and the subsequent sweep of the giant sword were broken by her divine sword, it was not without paying a price. In this world constructed by broken swords, every space was full of malice against swords. Every broken sword condensed by the heaven-splitting sword chi contained the attribute of broken swords. When the great sun golden brilliant sword collided with these broken swords, it was not destroyed, but the sharpness of the sword was somewhat consumed. As a result, Zhu Shiyao's last sword strike was finally unable to flow smoothly, and the sword edge was slightly out of line with her expectations. In fact, this result was quite good. Even immortal King Pil would die immediately after being penetrated by an upper-grade spiritual treasure. His body would collapse and his primordial spirit would disperse. However, Wang Lu was still alive and he was living very well. He was indeed a born excellent attacker, but after 10 years of cultivation he was first and foremost an extremely professional defender. All his cultivation was focused on defense and life-saving. At this time, his cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds, and his body was naturally more powerful than before. The so-called crushing with absolute strength was actually based on this. Eldest senior sister, your divine sword is indeed invincible, but even if I let you pierce through my chest, you can't kill me. In such a situation, what else can you do? And Zhu Shiyao was naturally aware of the change in the situation. In front of her, there were still countless virtual shadows, but the one she wanted most could not be seen at all. She tried to pull back the great sun golden brilliant sword, but found that the sword had been completely locked in the opponent's body. The opponent would rather endure the pain of being cut by the immortal sword than let go. You've finally been caught by me. With a grim smile, Wang Lu stretched out his hand and grabbed Zhu Shiyao's slender wrist in front of him with great force. In the latter's astonished look, he punched her in the face. Chapter 260. The slap in the face was just the beginning. In fact, the fist that landed on Zhu Shiyao's nose was more symbolic than practical. Zhu Shiyao was different from Lu Li. She wasn't the type of person who only focused on offense without defense. When her stellar sword chi protected her body, her skin was like inlaid with countless fine diamonds, which was incomparably hard. Wang Lu's heavy punch had already used his true power, yet it still couldn't cause any real harm. Zhu Shiyao only felt a buzzing sound in her head and a nosebleed gushed out, but it was no big deal. Fortunately, when the opponent's heavy punch was about to hit her, she managed to see the perfect way to dodge. However, an ominous premonition still lingered in her heart. She was very clear that the fight was not over, and her situation was very delicate. From the other end of the sea of black fog, she had been fighting against the opponent's natal magic in her peak state. The Stardust Sword Chi and the attack that broke the giant sword were all exerted by taking advantage of the momentum. She had relied on the spirit of the long-distance attack to achieve success in one fell swoop, and not entirely built on the starry divine eyes. However, in the end she was still blocked, not by the opponent's immortal sword, but by an inconceivably strong defense and vitality. Although she was somewhat embarrassed and somewhat reluctant, she still couldn't win even after using all her strength, which meant that the opponent's strength was beyond the scope of what she could deal with. After that sword strike, her sword momentum was exhausted, and if she continued to fight she would lose without a doubt. Fortunately, she at least had the ability to protect herself. If she went all out in defense, she was confident that she could escape unscathed. However, the strange feeling in her heart was still there, as if something bad might happen at any time. "I've finally caught you. Come out." Along with the man's roar, Zhu Shiyao finally found the source of that strange feeling in her heart. Yes. I've made a mistake in a very important thing. The key to this fight was not to behead the demonized follower who was seduced by the sword demon, but to behead the sword demon to help the sword god merge into one, becoming the complete sword saint of Bai Li. Similarly, the opponent's target was not her, but the sword god that was attached to her body. Sure enough, when the punch, which was not particularly powerful, landed on her face again, Zhu Shiyao could clearly feel a strange power invading her body. In the next moment, the sword god let out an angry roar after being stimulated by this power. "How dare you!" At the same time, sword god rushed out from Zhu Shiyao's body and pointed her heaven-splitting sword chi at Wang Lu. Its sharpness was not inferior to Zhu Shiyao's great sun golden brilliant sword. What was even rarer was that the sword momentum was strange, making it impossible to guard against. As the sword god of Bai Li, even though he had just been resurrected and his power was still extremely weak, his control of subtle power was still not something a newbie in the cultivation world could compare with. This sword strike might not have been as powerful as Zhu Shiyao's magical power of absolute victory, but it was still not something that Wang Lu could easily block. What's more, Wang Lu's chest had been pierced through. Although he was still alive, he couldn't use his full strength. But if Sword God made a move, would Sword Devil watch with folded arms? "Humph, I've waited for a long time and you're finally willing to show yourself?" As Sword Devil's figure appeared next to Wang Lu, Sword God smiled. "I've troubled you to wait for a long time, but unfortunately, I'm not willing to accompany you." After that, Sword God whistled and his whole body flashed. The next moment, he and Zhu Shiyao disappeared without a trace, and even the great sun golden brilliant sword that was inserted in Wang Lu's chest also disappeared. He actually escaped. Sword Devil looked solemn and said in a deep voice, "To be able to use his own spiritual power to break the shackles of your natural magical power and directly teleport away. He really deserves to inherit Zhong Xingming's orthodoxy. His power is above me. If it weren't for the Yin-Yang Sword Division formation, I'm afraid I would have been killed by him at this time." After that, Sword Devil paused and said, "It's a pity that you didn't have the last laugh after all your hard work." Wang Lu didn't care about this. The other party used a flash to barely save his life, so there's not much to be dissatisfied about. That kind of desperate escape spell can't be used indefinitely. And if we can win the first time, we can win 100 times. In this unique environment, my advantage will only snowball and they won't have a chance. "Well, your fighting spirit hasn't diminished, that's good. How's your injury?" "Hee, thank you for your concern. Although I lost a lot of blood, I can still recover." "Well, that's good. Pay attention to recuperate. There's no need to rush. They won't immediately make a comeback after a sudden defeat. We still have time." The two of them asked and answered, showing a touch of concern in their indifferent tone. However, there was something unclear in their tone, making the dialogue seem strange. At the same time, on the other side of the black fog sea, with a flash of chaotic light, Sword God and Zhu Shiyao appeared. Sword God looked a little tired. Just now, he used his own spell to break the life source magical power, which consumed a lot of energy. If he was at his peak, the life source magical power of 100 Wang Lu would also be smashed, but now he was far from the power of his peak. As for Zhu Shiyao, her face was still indifferent, neither happy nor sad, as if the defeat just now had never happened. At this time, holding the great sun-golden brilliant sword, her eyes were facing the sword light, and her mind was completely immersed in it. After a moment, the corners of her mouth slightly raised into a smile. Seeing this, Sword God couldn't help but sigh. What a sword maniac. She could immerse herself in swordsmanship at any time, but now was not the time. Sword Devil's means are unexpected. I didn't expect him to find such a powerful follower. In just a dozen hours his cultivation has skyrocketed 10 times. Unless it's the legendary Void Spirit root, he must have used some demonic method that can shorten his lifespan. I'm afraid that follower won't live long. But before that, I'm afraid our days won't be good. Seeing that Zhu Shiyao didn't respond at all, Sword God frowned and shouted, "Now is not the time to be leisurely." Zhu Shiyao's thoughts were interrupted, and she shook her head blankly and then said, "It doesn't matter." "It doesn't matter? Do you think after the last battle the opponent will still wait for us to take the initiative to attack? When that follower recovers, they will definitely take the initiative to attack." "It doesn't matter." After Zhu Shiyao finished speaking, she seemed to know that the weight of this sentence was not enough, so she hesitated and added, "Next time I won't lose." "Won't lose next time?" Sword God shook his head. Yes, Zhu Shiyao's growth speed was very fast, but the opponent was not slow either. The defeat just now seemed to be a slight difference, but with his vision, how could he not see that the slight difference was like a natural chasm? The opponent crushed him with absolute strength, and there was no solution at all. However, this situation was advantageous because the next step, while thinking, he heard Zhu Shiyao said happily, "I found a way to repair my glasses." "What?" Zhu Shiyao said, "Just now the demon's supernatural power gave me inspiration. I can, like him, use spiritual power to condense a magic treasure, and temporarily replace the original." Sword God looked stunned as if he couldn't believe this idea. Zhu Shiyao didn't explain much, she was bad with words, not to mention that some things to show people were more powerful than any words. So while recalling the inspiration that flashed in her mind, she began to mobilize her spiritual power, condensing a crystal on her fingertip. To condense the mysterious spiritual power into a solid, this required a very brilliant use of spiritual power. Zhu Shiyao tried it for the first time and felt that it was extremely difficult. After a while, sweat appeared on her forehead, but the small lens on her fingertip was also constantly being melted, showing an appearance that was getting closer and closer to the original. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Zhu Shiyao let out a long breath. "It's done." Saying that, with a smile on her face, she fiddled with the lens on her fingertip, and then gently put it on her left eye. This lens was not easy to refine, but for Zhu Shiyao one lens was enough. Most of the illusion in front of her was filtered by the lens. Feeling the familiar field of vision, Zhu Shiyao's smile didn't change, and an inexplicable aura gradually rose from her body. "Now I will never lose." Although without the lens, Zhu Shiyao still retained a strong fighting power, but after wearing the lens she was like a different person, and her aura was much stronger than before. Congratulations." Behind her, Sword God's voice seemed somewhat indifferent, but Zhu Shiyao didn't notice it. Her keenness was more reflected in the fight. In addition, her sluggishness was comparable to Lu Li. Because of her sluggishness, Zhu Shiyao spoke without any scruples, and in her excitement she casually said, "This time I can know who the follower of the demon is. Previously I always felt that he looked familiar, but I couldn't see him clearly." "You can see him clearly by wearing the glasses?" The voice of Sword God sounded from behind her. Zhu Shiyao nodded. "It's definitely possible. This exchange has confirmed my suspicions. I've probably met that person before. I'm too familiar with his core cultivation technique. If possible, I should advise him to repent, not to be the accomplice of the demon and not to kill each other. Previously, I didn't show any mercy with my sword. If Master is here he would probably blame me. So should I apologize?" She didn't know how long these words had been lingering in her heart, but when she said them she didn't stumble at all. In this regard, Sword God suddenly sighed. "It's really a pity. Your talent is strong, and your dedication to the way of the sword is something that I've never seen in my life. If possible, I really want to accept you as my successor. You have the stellar divine eyes which can see through the future, so you can certainly achieve higher achievements than me. But why do you want to bring about your own destruction?" "Huh?" Upon hearing this, no matter how slow Zhu Shiyao was, she still felt that something was wrong. When she turned around, she didn't see the figure of Sword God. There was only a mass of red mist that blotted out the sky. At the same time, on the other side of the sea of black mist, Wang Lu, who was in the middle of healing, had nothing to do, so he asked Sword Demon a question. You said that you and Sword God are the millions of remnant souls of Zhong Xingming in the past. Although now you've grown stronger, you're still remnant souls, which means you don't have a body? Chapter 261. Whether it was Sword God or Sword Devil, they were essentially Zhong Xingming's remnant soul. However, Sword God Baili was too strong. Even though it was only a remnant soul, it seemed no different from other cultivators' complete primordial spirits. Of course, a remnant soul was still a remnant soul, and there were all kinds of hidden dangers behind its power. As for the body, it was an extravagant hope. However, regarding Wang Lu's question, Sword Devil only lightly replied, for cultivators who have crossed the unity stage, the body is not important. As long as I can fuse my remnant soul, my primordial spirit, magic power, and body can completely fuse and transform with each other. Wang Lu said with a smile, that's good. I was afraid that after you went out, you would be illuminated by the sun or astral winds and yin qi, and your soul would fly away and scatter. Although you are a devil, after getting along with you, I feel that you are a bit interesting. It would be a pity if you died so casually. You should take care of yourself first. Regarding Wang Lu's disrespect, Sword Devil didn't care. Perhaps it was because Wang Lu's innate magical ability made his heart grow stronger, or perhaps Wang Lu's existence as his trump card had an extraordinary significance. However, Wang Lu's next words made him pay attention. How about we talk about the future? Sword Devil froze for a moment. Are you sick? No, I'm just curious. Wang Lu smiled. In view of our current situation, I think we are already qualified to think about the future. For example, after we defeat Sword God and you successfully usurp his position as the genuine Zhong Xingming, what do you plan to do? Sword Devil didn't answer and instead stared at Wang Lu with a very strange gaze. This is not a question you should ask. Sword Devil lightly said, in the end, what are you hesitating about? Are you afraid that I will eat you? Since the other party went straight to the point, Wang Lu thought for a moment and bluntly said, it's not strange to cook the rabbit after it's dead, but I'm not worried about this. If you want to harm me, you have too many opportunities to do so, so worrying about it is useless. But I am really curious about what you plan to do in the future. Sword Demon didn't reply. Instead, a smile appeared on his face. However, it didn't seem to be the slightest bit intimate. Wang Lu said, what are you going to do after you go out? When you were alive, you were one of the top cultivators in 9 regions. You've achieved almost everything that a cultivator could achieve. You've even broken the 4 and 9 divine tribulations. What's your plan now that you've been reborn? Transcending the tribulation to become an immortal? Or rule the 9 prefectures? The Sword Demon sneered, but before he could open his mouth, Wang Lu coldly said, if you want to transcend the tribulation and become an immortal or unify the 9 regions, why did you choose the Bailey province as the place to ascend? Why bother challenging the 4 and 9 heavenly tribulations? The Sword God of Bailey had lived a happy life, and it was hard to imagine that he would be filled with hatred when he died. Since you don't have any regrets in your life, why bother spending 10,000 years to come back to life? As soon as Wang Lu finished speaking, Sword Demon's gaze suddenly became incomparably sharp. That was a good question. For ordinary people, survival was the instinct of all creatures. Zhong Xingming was seriously injured during his ascension, so it was natural for him to seek life in the midst of death, even after 10,000 years. So what doubts did he have? As for after his resurrection, it was natural for him to break through the threshold that he had never crossed in his previous life. Transcending the tribulation and becoming an immortal was the ultimate dream of any cultivator. Perhaps some people would say that there were numerous cultivators in this world, but how many of them would talk about ascension all day long? Most of them didn't live a mediocre life, and even before reaching the Taoist Master King Pill realm, they would turn into a handful of dust. During this period, they would enjoy the convenience of the immortal method, far more than the pursuit of a higher realm. However, this was obviously not the same. The common people were numb to ascension because they realized that they had no hope of becoming an immortal. If there was such a chance, who would miss it? Rumor had it that the treasured land in the upper realm was like a dream, far better than the mortal world of 9 regions. As long as one could break through the heavenly tribulation and ascend to the immortal world, one would enjoy endless immortal blessings. As the saying goes, there is a reason to enjoy immortal blessings forever. However, with Zhong Xingming's amazing talent, as long as he wanted to, he would most likely ascend to the immortal world. Even though in the long history the number of true immortals who ascended to immortality was not many, Zhong Xingming was still the top figure in this long period of time. Even the three true immortals who later ascended to immortality in the Baili region could not overshadow the brilliance of the Baili sword god. However, when Zhong Xingming was almost certain to ascend to immortality, he chose to commit suicide by challenging the 4 and 9 divine tribulations. This obviously meant that in his heart, some things were more important than the immortal ascension. In other words, the immortal ascension was not that important to him. For such a figure, wouldn't it be somewhat contradictory if he painstakingly pursued resurrection in order to cross the threshold of immortal ascension? The Baili sword god should be a hero who died with no regrets. The reason behind this was simple to say, but most people would not think about it in this direction. Only Wang Lu, who was also a person who lacked devotion to immortal cultivation, would naturally think of it in this way. Unfortunately, although this question was good, it was not raised at the right time. Sword Demon remained silent, but his eyes were getting sharper. Even if he was just a wisp of remnant soul, he still brought a strong sense of oppression. However, Wang Lu was calm and unafraid. In the past few years, when he confronted his master on the Spirit Sword Mountain, the pressure he bore was no less than what he was bearing now. And in most cases he was the one who had the last laugh. While the two of them were silently confronting each other, Wang Lu suddenly let out a soft cry of surprise. He put his hand into his pocket and touched a booklet. It was the Lingjian School's team leader's handbook. At this time it was very hot. He didn't open it in front of Sword Demon. Instead, he reached out and touched the inside page, and his heart immediately understood. The situation had changed and worsened. His big sister Zhu Shiyao's page suddenly turned from orange to red. Moreover, it was so red that it turned purple and then it turned black. This meant that his senior sister's situation had changed from a difficult situation to a dangerous situation, or even a dead situation. Once the color completely turned black, Wang Lu could directly tear off the page and burn it for her. But this was completely unreasonable. Everything was fine, so how could the situation suddenly deteriorate? Just now, in the fierce fight, although Zhu Shiyao and the others lost, they didn't suffer any serious injuries. At most, they only had a few liters of nosebleeds. It would be ridiculous to say that the situation worsened because of excessive blood loss. Or could it be that after losing the last fight, the two of them were eager to win, so they began to practice some kind of evil method? Last time, his senior sister suffered a loss in close combat, so she switched to long-range combat. In order to quickly improve her strength, did she cut something that shouldn't be cut? Unfortunately, as long as he thought about it a little more, these conjectures seemed absurd. Therefore, an even more absurd conjecture came to his mind. At the same time, Sword Demon's expression also changed. He immediately looked at Wang Lu and said, "It seems that you also know." Wang Lu nodded and was about to speak when a violent wave of magic power surged from afar. When he turned his head to look, a jaw-dropping scene came into view. In the distance, the vast sea of black fog suddenly surged, and countless stars flickered in the darkness. In a moment, half of the Black Sea was as bright as day. The bright star river tore the darkness apart, and countless lightning bolts gathered in the boundary between light and darkness, intensifying the turbulence of space. And in the center of the strange change, a graceful woman held an immortal sword in her hand. The sword light flickered, causing the stars in the black fog to crazily roll. If it wasn't Zhu Shiyao, who else could it be? Seeing this scene, Wang Lu couldn't calm down no matter what. His mouth was wide open, and his pupils rapidly contracted. "I want to complain, I want to report. This cheater has no lower limit. Be careful." Just when Wang Lu was shocked by this strange change, Sword Demon raised all his spirit. After a loud shout, he suddenly raised his hand to grab Wang Lu and dodged to the side. The next moment, in the distance, Zhu Shiyao showed a trace of a ferocious smile and swung the great sun-golden brilliant sword downward. Suddenly the stars in the sky fell, and the star river flowed to the ground, sweeping up the black fog and lightning all over the sky. For a moment, it seemed that the world was collapsing, and the end of the world had arrived. This kind of power was not something that could be measured by Shudan, King Pill, and so on. In this closed world, it was wrapped in a huge amount of black fog. This blow was the anger of the world, and it was the 49 heavens' retribution. No matter what kind of magical power it was absolutely impossible to compete with it. And the collapse of the world was also unavoidable. However, Sword Demon reacted at the fastest speed and flashed to the side with Wang Lu. Although he couldn't dodge the attack, he boarded a boat. The Sea of Bitterness boat. It was also at this time that Wang Lu realized that this Sea of Bitterness boat was indeed worthy of its reputation. In addition to braving the wind and breaking the waves in the vast sea of bitterness, when misfortune came, it was a shelter that would protect you to tide over the difficulties. The moment Sword Demon and Wang Lu boarded the Sea of Bitterness boat, the stars and lightning finally fell to the ground, triggering a boundless tide of destruction. But in the tide, there was no trace of the Sea of Bitterness boat. Time is limited, so don't talk nonsense. In a narrow space, Wang Lu and Sword Demon stood opposite to each other. Their complexions were incomparably solemn. In the silence, Sword Demon was the first to open his mouth, leading the topic. The situation is very simple. Zhu Shiryao is possessed by the Sword God. Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by Wang Lu coldly. Possessed? I think it's possession. Sword Demon closed his eyes. No matter what, the other party's strength is far above you and me. Wang Lu sneered. If you want to contend against him, you have to do the same thing. Do you want to possess me? Then fully display your Mahayana supreme level consciousness and skills to contend against the Sword God in the same situation. Sword Demon asked, or do you have a better way? Wang Lu thought for a moment. I don't think so. Then you? Just as Sword Demon opened his mouth, he saw a sword light coming straight at him. But he didn't panic. He moved sideways, raised his hand and blocked the sword light. At the same time, his tone didn't change. Don't waste time with internal strife. Wang Lu didn't speak. He casually flipped the sword of Mount Kuan and launched his original magical ability. Within a radius of 300 meters, broken swords were like a forest, and the blood-colored sky was covered with dark clouds. Surrounded by broken swords, Sword Demon just sighed. If you want to kill me, it's not difficult, but it won't do you any good. Wang Lu just urged thousands of broken swords to float in the air, and his killing intent became more and more intense. I think killing you is the right choice. There are some things I don't say, but it doesn't mean I didn't think about it. Previously, when I fought with Sword God for the first time, you infused me with heaven-splitting sword chi. It seemed to help me, but in fact it was to confuse me, right? I've always felt strange. I have no enmity with Senior Sister, so why did she want to kill me? Later, I thought that maybe Senior Sister's eyesight is bad, and she didn't recognize me when she saw my devil chi. And where did my devil chi come from? Regarding this, Sword Demon didn't hide it. Yes, I infused you with devil chi, but if I didn't, I'm afraid you and your Senior Sister would have joined forces and turned around to kill me. Hey, you always like to talk reason, so tell me, am I in the wrong? Wang Lu didn't hesitate. I am in the wrong. After I kill you, I will burn the inspection report for you. After saying that, thousands of flying swords fell to the ground. Chapter 262. It's useless. Following Sword Demon's indifferent words, the dust that filled the sky slowly fell to the ground. In front of Wang Lu was a dense forest formed by the wreckage of swords. Tens of thousands of broken swords were gathered in one place, emitting an aura of destruction that would strike fear into one's heart. However, at this moment, a tall and lonely figure stepped lightly on the sword forest, wearing a pure robe that was spotless. Now is not the time for infighting, Sword Demon faintly said. He looked at Wang Lu, who was frowning, and said, similarly, you don't have the capital for internal strife. Your void spirit root is indeed powerful, but before your Tao is condensed, you don't have the qualifications to hurt me. Even if it's a remnant soul, it's still a remnant soul of the Mahayana stage. Wang Lu said nothing. Moreover, even if you kill me, it won't change anything. Perhaps you can indeed escape because of this, but for you, escaping on your own is probably not even a passing mark, right? Don't you want Senior Sister's life? Wang Lu remained silent. Sword Demon said, what you said about possession is not wrong. What Sword God did is to occupy Zhu Shiryao's jade mansion and body. However, this matter is not without a turning point. His situation is the same as mine, just a wisp of remnant soul. Therefore, your Senior Sister's soul didn't fly away and scatter. At present, she still has the leeway to struggle at death's door. Pausing for a moment, Sword Demon said in a deep voice, but if you really have the ability to kill me and return my remnant soul, then the Sword God's merit will be complete. Then, there will no longer be a place for your Senior Sister's soul to reside in that shell. Hearing this, although Wang Lu did not speak, he put away the sword of Mount Kuan. I know you have a lot of doubts, but now is not the time to explain them one by one. The time that the crossing adversity boat could buy was limited, and they could not afford to waste any more time. Listen carefully, the other party's decision to possess Zhu Shiryao was both a crisis and an opportunity. While he suddenly became stronger, he also had to face a huge hidden danger. If not for this, he wouldn't have waited until now. So if we want to reverse the situation, we can't waste this opportunity. Wang Lu said, in the end, you want to take over the body? As I said, if you have a better idea, just do it. Wang Lu sneered, but he was silent in his heart. He was indeed worthy of being the person who swept across the 9 regions 10,000 years ago. Even his remnant soul was so powerful. The old man had really seen through his temperament and was simply fearless. Just now, he launched a rain of swords attack with his original magical ability, but it was futile. Actually, Wang Lu did not feel discouraged. In the space of his original magical ability, he still had too many means. So what if it was Mahayana stage? A remnant soul would always have a flaw. What really concerned Wang Lu was the sword demon's last words. Even if he killed the sword demon, he wouldn't be able to save his senior martial sister. Instead, his senior martial sister would immediately die. Because of this, Wang Lu was truly hesitant. Of course, it was reasonable to say that no one else's life was more important than his own. Under such a dilemma, it was understandable for Wang Lu to place righteousness before family, but was he that kind of person? Wasn't it all for the sake of rescuing his senior sister? When he went deep into this place, didn't he consider that there would be danger? But in the end he still came. So since he came, he shouldn't let all his previous efforts go to waste and let his original decision become worthless. But on the other hand, was it because of a momentary decision that he had to sacrifice his own life? Wang Lu, time is running out, don't be indecisive. Listening to the urging of the sword demon, Wang Lu raised his head, looked at him deeply and then burst into a smile. I have made up my mind. Sword demon, oh? I decided. Wang Lu took a deep breath and looked at the sword demon's deep eyes. I want to do it alone. After a long silence, the sword demon asked, are you sick? Wang Lu said, I have a chance to win. After that, he took out the team leader's handbook from his bosom, tore off Zhu Shiyao's page and held it in his hand. Moreover, I'm not alone. In the sea of black fog, the wind and clouds were surging. At the center of the changes was a woman with an elegant appearance. Her expression was anxious and uneasy. Her hand that held the sword trembled slightly, showing that her patience was rapidly wearing away. She, or he, was waiting for the boat to appear from the mustard seed space. Then it would be a thunderous attack. He must not give the opponent any chance. Looking at the current situation, he already had an overwhelming advantage. Although he was the first to reveal his final trump card, which was hurried and embarrassing, and even cut off his own path of retreat, when he revealed his trump card, he had the upper hand. If that person wanted to live, the only way was to choose to take over his body like he did. Although that meant that both of their fates were destined to be miserable, at least he was the winner and there was still hope. Next, he would wait for that person to appear from the boat and then fight. In theory, he obviously had the upper hand. Whether it was the body or the body, his team was the strongest. As he was thinking, his eyebrows slightly moved. He was sensitive to the change in the space, as if something was about to break out of the cage. He immediately raised his vigilance, and the great sun golden brilliant sword in his hand glowed, ready to fight at any time. Then he saw the figure that he had been looking forward to for a long time. Wang Lu, holding the sword of Mount Kuan, slowly walked out from the void. His pace was filled with strong self-confidence and extraordinary imposing manner. Behind him, Sword Demon looked solemn. Wait, Sword Demon? How could there be Sword Demon? He looked at the figure that was exactly the same as him in disbelief, and the surprise in his heart was indescribable. Why was he here? He should have already possessed Wang Lu and merged with him. Now, could it be that he failed to possess Wang Lu? Yes, it was quite possible. Although Wang Lu had amazing potential, he was difficult to control or even impossible to control at all. It was also because of this, coupled with some other factors, that he did not choose him as his successor. But unexpectedly, Zhu Shiyao, who seemed to be the easiest to deal with, still had a problem. He had clearly secretly destroyed her eyes, but in the end she actually figured out a way to control herself. He was forced to make the first move before the matter was exposed. It was a pity that a good seedling was wasted. But this little regret was soon replaced by ecstasy in his heart. Since Sword Demon did not choose to possess Wang Lu, it was the best. He could completely win instead of losing both sides. Although he was also wondering why Wang Lu wanted to die, the situation had developed to this point. Should he shrink back because of this doubt? When he chose to possess Wang Lu, there was no way back. So he resolutely made a move. The stars in the sky moved according to his heart, and the terrifying aura that could destroy heaven and earth filled the air. Even if it was only a remnant soul, it was still a remnant soul of the great vehicle stage. Once he had a body to rely on, his power was still extremely powerful. But at the same time Wang Lu also made his own response. He looked at the elegant woman not far away and said softly, "Senior sister, are you so useless?" "Senior sister?" Sword God sneered in his heart. "Your senior sister has long been suppressed to the point that she can't move, struggling at death's door. If it weren't for my incomplete soul at this time, making some corners difficult to touch, I would have already destroyed her soul. What's the use of calling her at this time? Do you want to use her to cause internal strife in my body so that you can reap the benefits?" Whimsical. But at this time, he suddenly felt a strange fluctuation blooming in his body, as if a pile of dead ashes began to reignite. This time, Sword God was really taken aback. He didn't expect Zhu Shiryao to be so tenacious. She was suppressed by him to the point that her soul almost flew away, but at this time, she still had the strength to fight with him. However, this was just a desperate struggle of a cornered beast. Zhu Shiryao's body in Jade Mansion had been occupied by him, and there was only a trace of space left in the space where her primordial spirit was residing. The influence that she could exert was extremely limited. It was impossible for her to hold him back in the fight. For example, now, although she tried her best to rouse her soul, trying to regain contact with her body, in fact, her body was steadily holding the great sun golden brilliant sword and slowly falling down. When the sword fell to the ground, the world once again collapsed, and this time, there would never be a sea of bitterness surpassing adversity boat to save them. In the eyes of Sword God, he had clearly seen the opponent, under the absolute crushing power, desperately trying to resist, but in vain they were turned into ashes. Of course, this ashes did not include Wang Lu. This kid's life was still useful, but Sword Demon could not be left alive. As the stars in the sky fell, Sword God even clearly saw the expression of his old rival before his death. There was a bit of relief and a bit of uneasiness. His lips opened and closed, but he didn't know whether it was the most vicious curse or a sigh of emotion. However, all of this had nothing to do with him. The story of the loser was doomed to be destroyed, and only the winner could sing generously. But did he win just like that? Wasn't it too simple? In a trance, Sword God found it hard to believe. However, at this time, a cold touch came from his forehead. The chill from his forehead spread all over his body in an instant, causing Sword God to tremble involuntarily. While trembling, everything in front of him collapsed like broken bubbles. The space that was torn by the incomparably powerful Sword Chi, the remains of Sword Demon that were cut into pieces by him, and Wang Lu who was stunned by the aftermath of the falling stars, all disappeared. And the great sun golden brilliant sword in his hand, for some reason, was still held high above his head. The primal chaos heaven-splitting Sword Chi was brewing in both sides of the blade, but it had not been released yet. But the opponent's sword of Mount Kuan had already pierced his forehead. What's going on? Can't tell the real from the fake? Poor guy. Wang Lu's sneer was so harsh, but unfortunately Sword God had no time to fight back. The tip of the sword of Mount Kuan surged with a power that he hated. Primal Chaos Heart Demon God destroying Sword Chi. This was Sword Demon's unique skill, which specialized in destroying primordial spirit. Even though it was displayed by Wang Lu, and its power was greatly reduced compared to the original version, it still could not be underestimated. Sword God was caught off guard and was immediately shaken by this sword strike, causing his soul to tremble and his primordial spirit to crack. Just as Sword God struggled to fight back, the scene in front of him changed again. He clearly saw Wang Lu being torn apart under his sword, and Sword Demon, who was in a semi-possessed state behind him, died miserably. Every detail was seen in a panoramic view. But soon these scenes became illusions again. Wang Lu had already pasted a talisman on his body. Seal of God. This time, all the magical powers of Sword God were sealed, and even the anger of his primordial spirit was suppressed. The seal of God released close to his body destroyed his last chance of winning. Although possessing Zhu Shiryao could exert a powerful strength, he was caught off guard and was hit twice in a row, so he was powerless to reverse the situation. After being hit twice in a row inexplicably, a light flashed in Sword God's heart, shining through the haze. Zhu Shiryao, it's you? Is it you who rashly used your innate magical power to hinder me? In his primordial spirit, although Zhu Shiryao's voice was weak, it sounded very firm. This is not your magical power, don't even think about taking it away. Then Wang Lu's voice also squeezed in. After sealing Sword God's primordial spirit, his primordial spirit was almost defenseless. Senior sister did a good job, but Sword God, please die obediently. You are a senior cultivator, don't make yourself look too ugly. Ah, you think you won? All of you shall be buried with me. While laughing wildly, cracks suddenly appeared on Sword God's tightly locked primordial spirit. Wang Lu immediately used the second and third seal of God, building an unbreakable barrier to prevent him from dying indiscriminately. But after Sword God's primordial spirit shattered, there was no violent explosion as expected. On the contrary, in the middle of the fragment, a black hole appeared and then an irresistible suction force sucked everything in. Chapter 263. It was pitch black. There was no light in his line of sight. Of course, it was a bit far-fetched to say that he could see because right now Wang Lu had no eyes at all. At this time, his primordial spirit was in an out-of-body state. Just now, he used the combination of God extinguishing sword and God seal to seriously injure Sword God. When Sword God was defeated, he chose to perish together with him. Then, a primordial spirit black hole suddenly appeared and directly pulled his primordial spirit out of his body. What was the principle of this black hole? For the time being it was not known. Because in theory the body tempered by non-phase method could be called an iron wall, so how could it be so easy to pull out the primordial spirit? If Sword God could tear other people's primordial spirit at will, he would have done it long ago. Why would he wait until now? However, from the current situation Wang Lu had completely lost his physical perception. His perception of the surrounding was as if his five senses had been melted into a ball, which was very mysterious and familiar. This was exactly the perspective of his Jade Mansion, also known as Divine Sense, Primordial Spirit Acquaintance. However, at this time, it was not the inner view cultivation, so the location of the primordial spirit could not be determined. Wang Lu controlled his primordial spirit to disassemble his Divine Sense, which was similar to the perception of the five senses of the body. A moment later Wang Lu saw himself in the darkness. It was still the successor-disciple uniform, the red and white robe that he had worn for 10 years. This image was Wang Lu's most intuitive perception of himself, so the primordial spirit form was like this. After disassembling his Divine Sense, Wang Lu soon saw a bit of light in the darkness. After walking toward the light for a while, his field of vision gradually widened. Soon, in the middle of the light, Zhu Shiyao's figure was clearly discernible. Seeing that slender and slightly delicate figure, Wang Lu immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He did not hesitate to take the risk to come here from the Eight Gates trial just for this awe-inspiring and dignified big sister. Although there were such contradictions in the middle, and the current situation was far from optimistic, Wang Lu still smiled and greeted, "Senior sister, I trust you've been well since we last met." Upon hearing his voice, Zhu Shiyao turned her head. Obviously, she was also very accustomed to the way of communication between primordial spirit and body. Upon hearing Wang Lu's greeting, she somewhat doubtfully asked, "Who are you? Calling me senior sister, is that a junior brother from the Spirit Sword Mountain?" Wang Lu was shocked. Bastard, pretending not to know after stabbing someone? However, Zhu Shiyao quickly explained, "My stellar divine eye's divine ability hasn't reached great success, so my perception ability is flawed." "Junior martial brother, please show me the sword art you're good at." Wang Lu was startled again. "Traitor son, you speak so smoothly? Is your tongue straight?" On second thought, he realized that Zhu Shiyao could only express herself fluently when she was communicating with her primordial spirit like this. On the other hand, displaying the sword technique that he was most proficient in for identification. Could it be that you recognize people based on their sword techniques? With this thought in mind, Wang Lu activated his primordial spirit and released the non-phase sword light. Zhu Shiyao's eyes suddenly lit up. "Ah, it's the non-phase sword. Fifth martial uncle's non-phase sword. You're Wang Lu? Young girl, you really have good eyesight. You don't recognize my face that can make young girls dream about, but you can clearly recognize my sword light when it's just beginning to shine." What a strange fetish this was. A person has all kinds of characteristics, but you just have to find the unpopular one. Zhu Shiyao said confidently, "What do other characteristics have to do with me? I only care about the sword technique." After a pause she said, "Sure enough, it's you. I vaguely felt that you were familiar before, but I really didn't remember. I didn't show any mercy before, I'm really sorry." Wang Lu didn't care. It was beneath his dignity to argue too much with a disabled person. "It doesn't matter, I understand." Zhu Shiyao was quite surprised that Wang Lu was so easy to talk to. The apology that she had prepared in her heart for a long time suddenly couldn't be said. She opened her mouth but didn't know what to say. She could only blink her pair of seemingly bright big eyes, revealing a blank and innocent expression. There was an awkward silence between the two, and then Zhu Shiryao said, "Junior martial brother, are you also here to compete for the sword god's inheritance?" Wang Lu said snappily, "I'm here to save you. You've always been orange-red in the team leader's handbook, so obviously you're trapped. As the team leader, of course I have to find you. Later, I heard that you became the godfather of an ancient sword god, but the handbook was always orange. I knew that your situation wasn't good and most likely you were tricked. It's a pity that I didn't have the chance to explain it to you." Zhu Shiyao was stunned for a long time before saying, "Oh." After a long time she said, "Thank you. You're welcome. I didn't save you anyway and I even lost myself." As Wang Lu said this, he looked at the vast darkness around him, but it seemed even deeper than the endless sea of bitterness. The sea of bitterness was boundless, but at least there was black fog churning around him, making people realize that this place wasn't dead silent. But at this moment, other than the spot where Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao were standing, the rest was empty. They were probably trapped by some ancient divine ability when the sword god self-destructed. If they wanted to break out, they didn't know how. After a long period of silence, he heard Zhu Shiyao say, "Junior brother you." Wang Lu waved his hand. "I'm fine. It's the duty of the team leader to share weal and woe with the teammates. No matter what you think, when we left the mountain, Master and Uncle asked me to take care of everyone, so I have to shoulder the burden. Besides, the situation is not that bad now. It's better for 2 people to be trapped than for 1 person to die. At least we can still think of a way. What I want to say is, you're really weak." Wang Lu was stunned for the time it took to drink a cup of tea. His heart was like a raging sea. "Big sister, are you King asking for a beating? I worked so hard to come here to save you, but you just stabbed me and scolded me. You're like the Pan Jinlian who abandoned her ex-husband and hired a gang of gangsters to break people's legs." Zhu Shiyao said, "What I want to say is that Master once told me that you're the lead disciple of the Spirit Sword Mountain, and in all aspects you're above me. In the future you're likely to inherit the position of the sect leader. However, in the previous 2 fights your strength is really weak. At least you're not stronger than me." With that, she was somewhat indignant, as if she disapproved of her master's evaluation. Wang Lu's voice sank. Did the sect leader say that? As the lead disciple of the Spirit Sword Mountain in the future, he would inherit the position of the sect leader? Was that what Fengyin Taoist master intended to do? Although the Heavenly Sword Hall elders had vaguely hinted at this, it was unexpected for Fengyin Taoist master to make such an obvious statement. Yes, in the current Lingjian school, the only one in the younger generation who could assume the position of sect leader was Wang Lu. Lu Li and Zhu Shiyao's strength were enough, but in other aspects they were far from enough. As for Wen Bao, Yu Xinyao and the others, they were also excellent cultivators, but compared to Wang Lu they were far behind. But this was the position of the sect leader of one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League. Well, let's wait and see. Fengyin Taoist master's appearance looked old, but in fact he only cultivated for more than 200 years. With his deity stage cultivation base, he was already at the age of committing a crime. He still had a long way to go, so there was no need to care about the sect leader. However, what was the meaning of Big Sister's attitude? Was she dissatisfied with him, the future sect leader? "So, senior sister, do you think you're more suitable to be the sect leader?" Zhu Shiyao said, "I don't want to. If master thinks you're suitable, then it should be right. I don't look at people, I only look at swords. Therefore, perhaps you're very suitable to be the sect leader of Spirit Sword Sect, but your swordsmanship is not strong enough." Wang Lu was amused. "Loser, do you have the nerve to say that?" Zhu Shiyao immediately stuck out her chest. "I didn't lose. In terms of swordsmanship, I'm still stronger. Previously, I lost because my glasses were broken, so I was a bit slow in grasping that opportunity. At that time, my condition was not good." With that, she suddenly had a flash of inspiration. "It's like, if one day you're seriously injured and I defeat you, does that mean I'm stronger than you?" Wang Lu asked. "The strength that can only be displayed by relying on the glasses is not called strength. If one day I take a demon disintegration pill or something, and my strength soars by 10 times, and I can crush you like an ant, do you think I'm 10 times stronger than you?" However, Zhu Shiyao said, "The glasses are not a foreign object, but an important support that closely matches my cultivation technique. When I achieve Jindan and the Great Tao is formed, I can internalize foreign objects. In short, the glasses are an inseparable part of me." "An inseparable part?" Wang Lu was about to spit. He thought to himself that although this eldest senior sister often looked like she had a screw loose in her head, she would occasionally say something shocking. If one day she found an ancient swordsmanship manual and learned that it was necessary to practice it, would she be conflicted about being inseparable? Words are not convincing. Since you stubbornly believe that you're stronger, then when we get out of here, let's have a one-on-one duel in the arena of Ethereal Peak. The loser will call me father. How about that? It's a deal. Zhu Shiyao's eyes shone with eagerness. To her, being able to duel with an expert in swordsmanship was more attractive than anything else. Although she had belittled Wang Lu's swordsmanship cultivation, she only felt that Wang Lu's swordsmanship was slightly weaker than hers. It was difficult to predict the outcome of an actual battle, so he was the perfect opponent for a duel. But the problem now is how to get out, and first of all, where is this place? Deep in a dilemma, Wang Lu did not panic. Instead, he methodically began to analyze the situation rationally, trying to find a solution. This darkness seemed to be unsolvable, but Wang Lu believed that there would always be a way out. Why go through so much trouble? If there's no way out, then we'll cut a way out. After Zhu Shiyao finished speaking, the starry sword light bloomed from her primordial spirit. Wang Lu was too lazy to deal with such an idiot who only had swords in her mind. You do what you need to do, I'm going to think. Looking at Zhu Shiyao, who was constantly trying to cut through the darkness with her sword qi, Wang Lu suddenly thought of something while lamenting the persistence of this sword maniac. He and Zhu Shiyao were both in the primordial spirit state, but with their cultivation, it was impossible for their primordial spirits to be directly exposed. Before advancing to the nascent soul realm, in theory the primordial spirit was extremely fragile. It was the cultivator's purple palace that protected the primordial spirit until it was strong enough to move independently. So now, the place where their primordial spirits were, could it be? Thinking of the situation where Zhu Shiyao's body was taken over, Wang Lu's mind flashed like lightning. Holy shit, it can't be? This boundless emptiness and darkness was actually caused by Zhu Shiyao's purple palace being forcibly expanded by a quasi-true immortal's remnant soul? Wang Lu looked at the eldest senior sister in shock, who was still in a daze. Eldest senior sister, you're really tolerant. Chapter 264. Nowadays, when the cultivators mention the ancient times, most of them yearned for it. Although it was shameful to say that the modern people were not as good as the ancient people before the age of chaos, the surrounding spiritual energy was rich, and it was an indisputable fact that there were many powerful people. Right now, the number one cultivator in 9 regions was Supreme Hichu of Xingjing sect, who was only at the peak of unity stage, half a step away from the Mahayana stage. However, this half a step gap was only crossed by a few people in thousands of years. Moreover, all of them overdraft their potential, and after reaching the Mahayana stage there was no hope for further progress. As for crossing the tribulation to become an immortal, it was really just a legend. Compared to before the age of chaos, it was really incomparable. However, for the knowledgeable people, saying that the present was not as good as the ancient was just a general statement. Although the age of chaos was a catastrophe, the efforts of thousands of years of cultivators were not without results. Compared to the ancient times, although the current cultivators were a bit behind in terms of stage, there were too many tricks in the same stage. In a simple and crude way, the current cultivators' basic points were low, but their bonus points were relatively high, and overall they were not too inferior. For example, the 9-tailed fox that wreaked havoc in Blue River region decades ago should have reached the true immortal stage, but wasn't it still suppressed and sealed in the body of the lady boss? In the past, if the sect leader was just a deity stage cultivator, the other party could destroy the sect with just a tail. Therefore, even though Zhong Xingming had a frighteningly high stage when he was alive, breaking through the 4 and 9 divine tribulations, but considering, first, he was just a remnant soul, second, as a modern cultivator he had a super high bonus. So what if the other party was a peak Mahayana stage cultivator? Looking at the vast and boundless dark hall, Wang Lu tried to use this reason to persuade himself to overcome the difficulty. The peak Mahayana stage was not invincible. In fact, it was because of the previous God Extermination Sword and God Seal that the Sword God was forced into a desperate situation that he had to use his primordial spirit self-detonation. However, even if he lost, it was only because the Sword God was too weak at that time, and behind him was the Sword Demon, who was not inferior to the Sword God. A Mahayana stage cultivator was by no means as simple as high stage. Only by seeing this endless darkness could one truly realize the distance of the Mahayana stage. The other party was just a wisp of remnant soul that stayed in the purple mansion for a short time, but it had already left behind earth-shaking changes. This vast space was the expansion of the Purple Mansion to accommodate the primordial spirit of the Mahayana stage. For a Shudan stage cultivator, it was simply boundless. Although the power and strength of the soul could not be measured by the size, faced with the difference of thousands or even hundreds of millions of times, who could argue with them in a dignified manner? The power of the Mahayana stage was displayed in this most intuitive way, and in this case, it would be useless to say anything more. The only good thing was that when the situation changed, a countermeasure would surface. At this time they weren't imprisoned in some dangerous place, but in Zhu Shiyao's Purple Palace. But because of the expansion of the Purple Palace, their primordial spirits seemed too small. The problem here was that under normal circumstances, the Purple Mansion and the primordial spirit should be highly compatible. The primordial spirit's control over magic power and physical body was based on this compatibility. Using a more theoretical description, it was only when the primordial spirit and the Purple Mansion were compatible that the signal could be transmitted without any hindrance. Zhu Shiyao's primordial spirit was suspended in the air, unable to contact the outside world. Thus it was as if she was imprisoned. The solution was also simple. As long as she could get in touch with the Purple Mansion again, she could retract it. As a cultivator with sword spirit root, Zhu Shiyao's root bone aptitude was the best in the world, and the adaptability of the Purple Mansion was also good enough. However, the premise was that the primordial spirit must be able to connect with the Purple Mansion. Judging from the current situation, Zhu Shiyao really didn't know how long it would take before her primordial spirit could expand to fill the entire Purple Mansion, and it might even take forever. The cultivation of the primordial spirit was not independent, it must be complemented with the tempering of the physical body. However, the depths of the sword tomb were isolated from the main path. In theory, it was impossible to even achieve the king pill, so how could the primordial spirit be catalyzed to the level close to the Mahayana stage? In addition to this, the only way was to take an unconventional path, not to advance the primordial spirit, but to expand for the sake of expansion. However, there were also obstacles in doing this. With the Shudan stage's primordial spirit, after expanding thousands of times, it would inevitably lead to the soul flying away and scattering. Wang Lu cultivated the non-phase method, so his primordial spirit was much more condensed than ordinary cultivators. However, in a short period of time, the expansion of his primordial spirit by dozens of times was already the limit. If it expanded any further, he would have to bear the loss. And according to the current situation, without the expansion of tens of thousands of times, it was impossible to fully reach the Purple Mansion. Tens of thousands of times. No matter how it was calculated, at least it would be after reaching the King Pill realm. Therefore this road was tantamount to being sealed. In fact, the sword god blew up his primordial spirit and formed a black hole to trap the two of them in this place, of course, was not to let them easily find a way out. According to the current situation, what was waiting for Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao would be exhaustion and death after a long time. Of course, there was also a problem here. That was, Sword God completely ignored the existence of another person. However, Wang Lu could not count on that sword demon to help him. At present, he could only consider self-reliance, although his own way to solve the problem has been cut off. Although the way to solve this problem had been cut off, it was better for two people to be trapped than one person. Fortunately, when one person couldn't do anything, he could ask the other person for help. After telling Zhu Shiyao about his speculation, Zhu Shiyao blinked and asked, "And then?" Wang Lu said, "Senior sister, please inflate." Of course this was a joke. Even with the condensed primordial spirit of Wang Lu, it couldn't inflate thousands of times. Although the eldest senior sister's attainments in Sword Dao were astonishingly high, it was impossible for her primordial spirit to be better than his. Wang Lu only hoped that Zhu Shiyao could stand from the point of view of a top sword cultivator and give him advice to stimulate his inspiration. Unexpectedly, after listening to Wang Lu's words, Zhu Shiyao just nodded. Okay. Then she began to inflate. Although it was slow, it gradually expanded as if it couldn't be stopped. Wang Lu gawked for a moment, and then hurriedly opened his mouth to dissuade her. Hey, don't take things too hard. If you're scared out of your wits because of my words, I would feel that my previous efforts to defeat you would be greatly devalued. However, Zhu Shiyao didn't seem to hear Wang Lu's words. No wonder there's a familiar aura here. Turns out to be my Purple Mansion. In that case, I just need to let my light cover this place. As she spoke, Zhu Shiyao took a deep breath as she slowly inflated. Let there be light. The next moment, the light shone brightly. It was both bright and cold silver starlight and blazing like fire golden sunlight. Yin and yang combined and changed. It was the peerless secret of Lingjian School's star peak, star sword light. In an instant, feeling the star sword light surrounding his body, Wang Lu shook his head helplessly. He really underestimated the eldest senior sister's supernatural power. He also got a simple concept wrong. In theory, the inflating of the primordial spirit indeed needed to be more condensed so that it wouldn't lose its shape during the inflating process. However, too much condensing would affect the inflating process. But for the eldest senior sister, the situation was completely different. The star sword technique that she cultivated was the world's first-class sword technique with many variations. The power of her one sword to break all techniques was also the result of returning to simplicity after experiencing all the flourishing. And for such a versatile technique, it was actually very easy to inflate the primordial spirit. Of course, it wasn't a volume expansion in a strict sense, but a transformation of the state of the primordial spirit into light. Where the light was, the God was. This was the eldest senior sister's primordial spirit. I really can't help but admire her. And at the moment when the light flashed, Wang Lu was forcibly ejected from the purple mansion. Zhu Shiyao had occupied every inch of space in the purple mansion, and there was no place for Wang Lu to stand. After being ejected, Wang Lu only felt that everything in front of him was dark and bright, and in the blink of an eye he returned to his original body. And in front of him, there was no longer the incomparably dazzling figure of the eldest senior sister, but a cold and old face. "You're awake? Very good, faster than I expected." After that, the sword demon stood up and said to Wang Lu, "Get up, and then accompany me for a chat." Wang Lu nodded silently and looked around as he got up. It was still the place where he defeated the sword god, and the sea of bitterness around him was slowly swaying. The eldest senior sister, who had just been possessed, was lying quietly at his feet, looking serene, completely different from the heroic appearance of a sword in her hand. Wang Lu was not surprised. Transforming the form and expanding the primordial spirit by thousands of times, although it was a unique magical ability of the stellar sword method, the eldest senior sister, who was trying to reach the level of Deshang stage at the Shudan stage, must have carried a great burden. It was good that she was still there. Looking at her rosy complexion and normal breathing, she was most likely just exhausted. Her situation is good. Seeing what Wang Lu was thinking, the sword demon said lightly, using the magical ability of the stellar sword method to transform the primordial spirit, she thought of it and did it. After this time, if she can survive, the power of her primordial spirit will double in the future. Survive? Wang Lu keenly caught the point. What if she didn't survive? Only death. The sword demon said, "But put her matter aside, let's talk about us." Wang Lu was stunned for a moment, and then cupped his hands and said, "So, in view of the sword god's death, should I congratulate you for your success?" In fact, during the resuscitation, Wang Lu had already seen that the sword demon in front of him was very different from the previous one. Although he was still a remnant soul, after the death of the sword god, his imposing manner had undergone a tremendous change. However, it was not the kind of sudden, 10,000 times more intense, but somewhat mysterious and indescribable. If one had to say, the current sword demon was more in line with the image of an ancient true immortal in Wang Lu's imagination. Although the original sword demon also had a strong sense of oppression, and when the truth of many things was revealed, it made people feel even more depressed, but that was all. The sword demon in front of him had gone beyond the sense of oppression, which made people unable to perceive and ponder. The so-called heaven's power was unpredictable, describing this situation. The primordial spirit of a Deshang stage cultivator was so powerful. Changed? The sword demon shook his head. "I just took back what I deserve." Chapter 265. Get back what you deserve? Sword Demon's simple words revealed a message that wasn't simple at all. What was deserved? Sword Demon was obviously the reincarnation of the primordial spirit of the sword god of Bai Li, a usurper who was contaminated by the demonic creature. Shouldn't his fate be crushed by justice and crushed to pieces? Why did he say that? However, when Sword Demon indifferently said those words, Wang Lu felt that he was not very surprised. Because before this he had already vaguely noticed it. He just felt that, compared to the sword demon who stood in the position of usurper, the sword god beside Zhu Shiyao seemed to be too weak. From the beginning to the end, what exactly did the sword god do? It was nothing more than snatching big sister Zhu Shiyao as his follower and successor. After that, it was almost a failure. It was really difficult to connect him with the sword god who was unhindered in the 9 regions 10,000 years ago. On the contrary, Sword Demon really had the style of a peerless old devil. He hid behind the scenes and with a few words he provoked the people of the 4 sects to dance in his palm. He opened the gates one after another. First, he defeated the guardian who suppressed the Sword Demon, then he released a lot of negative emotions for his use before the trial of the 8 gates, and then he simply ran down to be his fighter. Finally, he defeated the combination of the Sword God and Zhu Shiyao. During this period, every step seemed like a miracle, and the difficulty was far higher than that of the Sword God. Compared to the legitimate successor, the realm of this usurper was higher. Moreover, when he thought about it carefully, the behavior of the Sword God was quite difficult to justify. For example, why did he deliberately conceal the relationship between him and Big Sister? Even when they fought for the first time, Big Sister couldn't recognize him. In addition to the Sword Demon's demonic energy, could it be that the Sword God also played a part in it? How did Big Sister's glasses break? After that, why did he suddenly choose to seize her body? Moreover, wasn't the act of seizing someone's body similar to that of a devil? Now it seemed that Sword Demon gave an excellent answer. Sword Demon tilted his head and looked at Wang Lu. You guessed right, the so-called Sword God is just a usurper. Wang Lu sighed. This was completely different from what he said before. What I said earlier was not a lie. Sword Demon said, indeed he is the one who inherited Zhong Xingming's lineage, while I am just a devil. After a pause, Sword Demon looked at Wang Lu with some rumination and said, but this doesn't change the fact that he is a usurper. So, can you guess the truth of the matter? Wang Lu thought for a moment and gave an answer. Did he usurp the throne 10,000 years ago? Very good. Sword Demon nodded. Go on. Sword Demon's attitude proved Wang Lu's conjecture. However, this idea was somewhat unbelievable to Wang Lu, so he slowed down his speech. It's just like the change of a dynasty. The original emperor is overthrown, and the leader of the rebel army ascends the throne, worships the heavens and earth and controls the dragon vein. To the common people, it's the same as the dynasty changing. But to the original emperor, rebellion is always rebellion. Then, you are the original emperor and the sword god is the rebel who usurped the throne? At this point, it seemed that things had been straightened out, but Wang Lu felt that there were more things that didn't make sense. You were overthrown by that kind of trash? This doesn't make sense. Moreover, you were able to resist the 4 and 9 heavenly tribulations when you were alive. It's impossible for you to accomplish such a feat under the condition of a split personality. It can even be said that your primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi is most particular about advancing courageously. You shouldn't have been eroded by the heart demon and become a split personality. This doesn't make sense. Seeing that Wang Lu's reasoning was difficult to continue, Sword Demon opened his mouth and said, the sword god's birth was an accident. Wait, the amount of information in this sentence is a bit too much. Sword Demon said again, it's not strange that you can't infer the truth, because your understanding of Zhong Xingming is wrong. Wrong information naturally can't infer the correct result. The sword god of Bai Li is a non-existent existence. If you carefully recall, you will find that I never took the initiative to mention this word. Non-existent? Where did this come from? Your understanding of the sword god of Bai Li Zhong Xingming comes from historical records. This is a matter of course. You are not someone who lived 10,000 years ago, so naturally you can only understand from books. But if you were lucky enough to be born 10,000 years ago, you should have heard of another name, the sword demon of Bai Li. The sword demon of Bai Li? Zhong Xingming was undefeated throughout his life. He was happy to repay kindness and enmity, but he never considered himself to be righteous. If he saw something pleasing to the eye, he would rob it, and if he saw something not pleasing to the eye, he would kill it. The immortal Tao that he cultivated could not even be restrained by the firmament of the 9 heavens, not to mention the ethics and morals of the world. A person who despises ethics and morals is naturally a demon. The sword demon of Bai Li is infamous. When Zhong Xingming was alive, who knows how many people would endlessly tremble because of his name. Wang Lu was simply flabbergasted. This was completely different from the record of the legend of Bai Li's ascension. It was even completely opposite. Although there would inevitably be omissions in the history books after tens of thousands of years, this kind of principled error was really rare. A peerless demon whose ominous name covered the entire 9 regions was actually not recorded in the history books. This Zhong Xingming did whatever he wanted in his life, but his desires were almost all concentrated on the way of the sword. He did not have much interest in anything in the secular world, so whether it was good or evil, he did not do much. At least, he did not have the qualifications to stay in the history books. Wang Lu nodded, indicating that he understood. The legend of Bai Li's ascension recorded the deeds of many cultivators who had ascended, as well as those who were close to ascending in the last 10,000 years. It was a thick book, and when it was spread over every cultivator's head, the space was actually very limited. Moreover, most of the ink and brushstrokes were spent on the cultivators' cultivation methods. As for their life deeds, naturally only one or two were chosen to represent them. As for Zhong Xingming, in fact there was almost no mention of his life deeds in the original text. Apart from spending a lot of space to describe the various kinds of inconceivable power of the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword, most of it was about Zhong Xingming's magnificent feat of creating a new world for the Baili region and piercing through the heavenly tribulation. As for his thousands of years of cultivation, regardless of whether it was good or evil, compared to the world-shaking battle during his lifetime, all of it was not worth mentioning. Wait, in other words, thinking of this, Wang Lu finally had an inspiration. Could it be that the so-called sword god of Baili is just a rumor? Sword Demon faintly smiled. Compared to the great merits of opening the path of ascension, everything in Zhong Xingming's life is insignificant. In terms of merits, it's not strange that there are more gods than devils. Wang Lu said, so that's how it is, but that's just a misunderstanding of the world. Zhong Xingming himself shouldn't be affected by external things. Regardless of whether the world has a good reputation or not, it has nothing to do with him. After all, he can't suddenly become a moral saint just because people say that he has great merits. Wouldn't he be condemned by thousands of people and die of no disease? The hearts of the people in the world have power. Perhaps the power of mortals in the world of mortals is still very weak, but it is different for cultivators who have embarked on the path of immortality. A tyrannical monarch can allow millions of people to curse him and still sit firmly on the throne, but no cultivator can withstand the unanimous rebuke of millions of cultivators. Similarly, when all the cultivators believe that a person who has blessed the people of Baili is the sword god, whether he is a god or a devil is no longer important. Sword Demon's smile was somewhat mocking. Zhong Xingming broke through the 4 and 9 heavenly tribulations, but he suffered a backlash from it. His primordial spirit collapsed, and his sword lost its sharpness. The power of hope of all living beings in the world contaminated his body, and he unexpectedly had no choice but to become a god. When Zhong Xingming chose to resist the heavenly tribulations, he disregarded life and death, but he didn't want to die in such an obscure way. Wang Lu nodded, expressing his deep understanding. At least when he died, his body was clean. But at that time he was already seriously injured and on the verge of death, unable to cut off the power of hope. Instead, he was constantly eroded by the power of hope, and gradually something that didn't belong to him appeared in his primordial spirit. At this point, the truth seemed to have been revealed. Wang Lu continued, so he scattered his primordial spirit and set up the method of dividing yin and yang by the sword. After 10,000 years, he experienced the transformation between life and death, filtered and purified his primordial spirit, and then reconstructed the body of God and devil, tracing back to the source? This reason seemed to be a lot smoother. Although Wang Lu still vaguely felt that there was an obstacle somewhere, the original mystery in his heart had been mostly solved. The only problem was, you can resurrect yourself, why do you need to involve outsiders? At least, there is no need for the sword god to bring in external help. After 10,000 years, he has already occupied the orthodox position, firmly suppressing you. Why do you need to bring in uncertain factors to find trouble for yourself? Sword Demon said, as early as 10,000 years ago, Zhong Xingming had already foreseen the possible changes that might happen. Before his death, his primordial spirit was eroded by more than half by the power of hope, and the position of host and guest had long since changed. If this development continues 10,000 years later, of course the sword god will be stronger. That's why there is a rule that the body of God and devil can't directly contact each other. Even if I want to kill the other, I have to rely on the hands of outsiders because this is my only chance. I believe you have also seen that apart from the power of the primordial spirit, there is nothing special about the sword god. If I directly confront him, of course I am not his opponent, but once more variables are introduced, his chances of winning will plummet. Wang Lu said, yes, I feel that every move of his is very clumsy, because he is just a child. Sword Demon said coldly, before Zhong Xingming died, he was born after being contaminated by the power of hope. The time of his consciousness is less than a month, so naturally he is clumsy. In other words, we are fighting to the death with a baby?